Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be doing a breakdown video for the Korea video that I did for Europa Universalis 5 that had a particular emphasis on economics. We will still have that emphasis on economics, although we will probably talk a little bit about other things, and this video is likely to be much longer and much more conversational rather than jump cutty. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty, we're going to talk about tangents and this sort of thing, and so if the pacing of that type of video doesn't work for you as much, this might not be the video for you. Now, before we get into this, there's one thing I wanted to talk about, which is just generally kind of the framing for evaluating stuff at this juncture, which is that the game is not yet finished. There haven't been balance passes, and so I think it's better to think of the game in terms of systems over conclusions. And what I mean by that is the systems and ways that things interact with each other, as well as the levers that the players has to interact with the various mechanics, are going to be better to focus on, not only for kind of forming a framework for understanding the game for when you eventually get a hold of it, but also for deciding if the game sounds like fun from the economics perspective. This is going to be more important than trying to find the right answer, because not only is the right answer likely to move, it's also just going to be very difficult to discern with such a limited playtime. I only have 200 hours. That's a very small sample size, and so a lot of the conclusions I come to are likely to be wrong in the abstract, but being able to think of the relationships, that is going to be much easier to do with a higher degree of accuracy than to form the correct conclusion about something, because 200 hours is kind of like nothing for a grand strategy game. So let's get into it. Hello, happy Friday. I got access to an early version of EU5 in order to make a video, but keep in mind it will be an early version, so there will be bugs and issues. I have 30 minutes. We're going to talk about economics. To start, the basis of all economics here in EU5 is going to be goods, of which there are an enormous amount. It is at this point I ask if you have any children present, any whatsoever, any tender souls under the age of 38, that you ask them to leave the room, that you lock them in the cupboard, that you throw them in the basement, because what comes next is not fit for their eyes. I'll give you guys a moment. Okay, we're of course talking about spreadsheets. Now, we're going to just kind of briefly cover this in terms of goods, but goods are going to have various characteristics. That's going to inform how you think about the goods, and in particular, I think it's worth thinking of goods as being either polarized or condensed in their pricing, which is to say goods that will tend to have either really expensive or cheap prices, and goods that will tend to have middling prices, and you should have this expectation, and you shouldn't over-adjust just because something's really expensive or really cheap with the various means by which you have to try and do something. So if you have a really cheap good, generally you should export it, but if it has certain characteristics, you shouldn't really try and do it. In terms of thinking of it as a distribution, a condensed good is going to have a more flat range and is going to overall look like kind of a flat distribution where a lot of the prices are going to be in the middle, and a polarized one is going to have either really expensive or really cheap prices, and is going to tend to, just be really expensive or really cheap, and you shouldn't try to overcorrect to these. So just briefly, things that are more expensive in price are generally speaking going to be more profitable to trade, because it is the margin between the two prices of the market that informs the value of the trade. It is easier to have a bigger margin when the price is higher, because if I have elephants, and those are plus 50% price, although I do think they're going to have a higher transportation cost, I didn't check it. If elephants have plus 50% price in one market and minus 50% price in another, the margin between the two is going to be 10, and so that's a very profitable trade. If we have, for example, rice, and one market is minus 50% and another market's minus 50%, trading that only yields one profit. And so you are going to see the prices of these things that have high base prices to generally trend towards more middling prices, especially as you get more trade range and more trade is occurring, and the places that have a hyper abundance of these things or a hyper shortage of these things gain access to markets that have the inverse relationship or the inverse thing of these. Now, the next thing is going to be transportation cost. And transportation cost, generally speaking, we're thinking of things in terms of per trade value. So things with a higher than one transportation cost are generally going to be more polarized, because trading these things is going to be more expensive. It will require more than one trade capacity in order to move these goods, and so you are going to see more polarized prices on these things in particular. Of note, I think it is worth kind of looking at that horses and iron, the goods that are used for military, are among these. So strategically speaking, If you are having difficulty sourcing horses and iron, it might be because the auto trade trades for profit, and it is difficult to trade for profit, in particular, on these types of goods that have a range that tends to be more polarized because the trade is not profitable. Conversely, stuff that has a cheap transportation cost, in particular, we're looking at spices, these things are insane to trade, and you should see these things fly off the shelf as a kind of natural matter of how the good works. It's going to be difficult to try and stop these trades, although you don't have much agency in regards to stopping the trades. And also, if you are building something to export, you should prefer to build stuff that has more of a condensed range because it will be easy to move. There's also base production. This is based on the development in your market. You will just produce some of these things. Notably, this is kind of all the basic goods by which you start getting the ball rolling. And there's also food per unit. It's important to note that not all food is created equal. Rice is going to be the most efficient per level of RGO at producing food for you. And we're not going to go into all of them. Just know that RGOs will produce a different amount of food. Of particular note might be wool, because it actually has a relatively high base price and produces food. And so wool, in terms of if your auto queue is producing it, or in terms of your financial recommendations, is going to be underrepresented, because not only is it going to be reasonably profitable, it also produces food, and so you should probably build more wool than it looks like you should do. Just briefly looking at the table for completed goods, again, this is based on the Tinto Talk numbers, so I don't know if these are kind of the best, is that you are going to see that fine cloth, for example, this has a really high base price, the highest base price of a finished good. So making fine cloth for the purposes of exporting, or having a comparative advantage in fine cloth, all other things equal, should be more valuable than having a comparative advantage in most of the other goods. The exception of which being goods that have a cheaper transportation cost, such that, per price, they are cheaper to move along, of which the big one that stands out is going to be jewelry, where if you kind of double its base price because it has half the transportation cost, it's going to cost 10 to move. So these things in particular are going to be better for building for the purposes of moving, and you should expect that there are deviations in price on these goods based on the characteristics they have. Have not just a base price value, but a price that is manipulated by supply and demand. Very, very briefly, because price downstream effects are way too complicated to unpack in a video, and they're generally videos on their own, is there are some cascading effects based on price that you see stuff that is maybe not intuitive, such as, for example, prices in your economy, it is generally better for them all to be high. This is because everything will be getting more value on average in terms of your buildings if the prices on average are high. Now, this isn't to say that you want an economy where one thing is really high and one thing is really low and you think that that's better overall, but in a general sense, higher prices are going to be better. An example of kind of a downstream or a cascading effect is when you borrow money. In order to spend more, you get not only the money you borrowed, but also by spending more, you create more demand and you drive up the prices of everything. When you drive up the prices of everything, you stimulate the economy, you make more money churn through the economy, and you can actually make it so that you make more money than the interest payment, such that, effectively speaking, the government loan and expenditure is free. This is an example, we won't go into too great a detail, which is going to function a lot of the interesting relationships for the game. Like that. These are going to be contained within your own market. However, on a broader scale, you can influence other markets through trade, and this is going to be an enormous source of value. This is a huge driving force of the way in which you extract value in trade in general, because if you produce a lot of a good, you will kind of collapse the price low, and what trade does is trade effectively unlocks your ability to gain value from things. If you have a price and you have collapsed the price, what trade allows you to do is, instead of making money based on this, let's say we have gold and gold is worth 5. That as a base price, that RGO is still producing a lot, but what trade allows us to do is we can get the margins between that and another price, and so let's say we trade to a place that has a price of 12 on their gold. Now, by doing this, we've allowed to turn our singular gold from 5 gold towards the tax base, because production goes towards the tax base, to now plus 7, getting 7 gold from trade on top of that 5, and this allows us to unlock the value. Not only that, but also, locally, we will drive up the price of gold because we've increased more demand. So let's say we get 6 here, and now the margin here is only 6, and so this comes back down. But the idea is trade allows you to unlock more value for all of the economic things that are occurring within your economy, and so this can't really be underemphasized how important trade is for being able to push things, especially because in this game, a ton of trade happens, because prices are calculated not just based on the supply and demand, but with an extra weight towards their own market, which, without going into too great a detail, pushes trade along more than it should. Can be produced in one of 2 ways. There can be RGOs, or resource gathering operations, which will get the base level goods, and then there can also be buildings, which will use PMs, or production methods, in order to produce stuff using the inputs gathered through RGOs or from other builds. So just kind of a brief point is, right now, I think RGOs are overtuned because they are not subject to negative effects of market capacity, which we'll get to in just a second, and are just generally really strong, but I also expect them to be stronger in the early game, so that evaluation might be wrong. Something that is worth noting is that a lot of RGOs that are kind of base production stuff will have buildings like this basin, which are going to be less efficient than the RGO themselves, but will allow you to produce the good locally in your market. So we'll see like lumber mills or this type of thing. I don't think we see them in this screenshot here. Your 2 main sources of income are taxing the estates, whose value is determined by the value is going to be the sell prices of all the buildings in the RGOs, and so the sell prices of everything is what's determining the tax base, and then on top of that, you can trade to squeeze out more value. Although eventually trade values start to come down as everyone is trading with each other, and they are squeezing out the margins. But you get the fattest margins if you are the ones controlling the trade, which is something we talk about later in the video. Briefly on the estates, I wanted to comment that throughout this run, we did not tax the clergy or the nobility at all. So these guys, we did not tax them. We didn't tax these guys because we don't generate a lot of money, and of the bonuses, monthly research progress is incredibly strong, and we didn't tax the nobles because, again, they don't generate a lot of money, and the prestige and counter-espionage, while not very good, they just don't generate a lot of money. Instead, what we had is we were taxing the peasantry here, and we were also taxing these guys here. Also, in particular, with the current build that we had, trade had not yet been nerfed, and so looking to maximally extract through tax was a lot less efficient because proportionally you were getting more money through trade. But again, balances change. And trade, which is determined between the difference between one market's price and another market's price, less the trade expenses of running the buildings that facilitate trade. The 2 main negative downward pressures on the economy are going to be control, which is a multiplier for how much value you get out of a location to the tax base. And also, of course, towards your sailors, your manpower, your levies, and your ability to have the market, tied in, or your market attraction as well. You could see that in the left. It's an anti-blobbing mechanic, and market access, where the amount of goods that you produce in a location is multiplied by the degree to... Okay, so we have a lot going on here with market access that is going to be different than control. Control is directly proportional, and it affects only what goes to the tax base, which is one of the reasons why trade is so strong early. What market access does is it affects RGOs and buildings differently. For RGOs, it proportionally just decreases the value that goes to the tax base. It operates like control, which means if you have 50 control and 50 market access, you're actually only getting 25% of the value of the building because it is going to be coming down multiplicatively with both of those 2 factors in terms of its contribution to the tax base, although the RGO will go to the market, and to the extent that an RGO unit is going to the market and that's useful, that will still be occurring. What happens with buildings, again, not RGOs, the buildings that have inputs with market access, we wanted to unpack this in the video, but this is something we squeezed out for time reasons, is it is going to decrease the amount of goods produced which means if you don't have market access, you really should try and avoid building buildings in that location. So we have this tooling workshop in Kaesong, which has 100% market access here. We have in Jinju this 53% market access. If we look at the output goods, 2.03 is being output here, 1.09 is being output here. That is to do with the market access that is in this location. So it really pushes down on buildings, but not as much on RGOs. This is also one of the reasons why, for places that are a little backward, a little bit behind, places like Mali, leaning into resources are going to get better because you have poor market access everywhere. So you would prefer to lean into resources, and then if you have really high market access, which I think it tends to occur as you get more buildings, naval infrastructure actually doesn't increase market access, or this was our observation, but I think that's a bug and we left feedback about it. But as you get into the later periods of time, buildings get better because they're getting more market access, and while market access hurts RGOs as well, they proportionally hurt buildings more, and so this is one of the reasons why there is a little bit of a shift. I also think there's a little bit of a paradigm in terms of the way people are looking at income now, which is going to be looking at income from the perspective of taxes versus trade. And I think that might just be the wrong framing, and I think they should instead look at their production of value from the perspective of RGO or building. And RGOs are generally going to feed trade disproportionately better relative to buildings, and buildings are going to feed taxes disproportionately better relative to RGOs. Now, the reason I think this framing should be the case is I think with most of the stuff you're doing internally in your own nation, not including stuff you're messing about in other people's markets, you're doing both tax, adding to the tax base, and often trading. And so thinking of it as one or the other, I think kind of dissociates you a little bit from what your actual lever in the game is, which your lever is choosing which building to build, and then you are going to try and extract value from that building, both in terms of tax base and in terms of trade. And so I think it's better to reframe it from the perspective of RGOs versus buildings, because with most of the buildings you produce, you're going to be getting tax-based value, and you're going to be getting trade value. And because if you can't get trade value, often you do not want to produce more of the good. Remember, we generally want to produce goods that are more condensed, that we can trade in order to pick up more value from, right? We're generally going to prefer to do that sort of thing. And so it's because of this that I think that the paradigm should be different in terms of how you conceptualize this versus that, which a lot of people are like, trade is super OP. I think the thing might be like RGOs are super OP more so than trade. Although I think trade's been nerfed, and I think it wasn't as bad as people thought it was, but also I think the nerf is smaller than people thought it was, and so it's all just kind of a wash. The trade nerf being now you don't get the full marginal value between the prices, and instead you get a marginal value proportionate to crown power, and the rest goes to the estates. But let's continue. Strategically speaking, most of what we'll be doing is focusing on trying to have as much control as possible in the... Now, the reason off to the left, you can see the max control. It actually is a penalty towards if you have downward satisfaction. It is about 10% total in terms of negative max control. And this was something that informed our estate strategy, is we were generally speaking preferring to give more estate privileges off the back of estates relative to like EU4. They give satisfaction to pops, and satisfaction gives you more control. And so this is one of the things that informed our strategy. It's why we're showing satisfaction off to the left more so than any other factor in the territories we own. Let's take a look at our unique situation in here in Korea so that we can formulate a bit of a strategy. Now, we already went over goods a little bit, so we won't really go into too much of detail on the value of goods relative to another. If we look at our resources, we have a lot of gold, we have gems, we have pepper, and we also have silver. All of these export really well, and so you can see we're already making a ton. They, of course, export well, as we mentioned, because they have high base prices. So we produce the good, we collapse the price of the good by producing more of it because we have more supply than demand. And then once the price is low, the margin is now large between the sell price and the buy price. Our sell price, the other market's buy price. As we mentioned with the gold, minus 50% selling to plus 50%. That is a 10 ducat margin, and that's buckets of ducats. A ton of money through trade. We are going to look to push these specifically, as well as push trade, and also be a little bit more backward with the economics specifically. And this is something we had also brought up. With traditionalism, in the early game, I actually think traditionalism's good. I think eventually it falls off, but RGO output is a pretty strong modifier, and we have raw materials output up there. Notably, if you're coming from Victoria 3, it's important to make the distinction that output is not throughput. Output just increases the amount that you are putting out. It doesn't increase the inputs, but RGOs don't have inputs anyways. Leaning on resources rather than production. And of course, the other side of traditionalism is capital economy. And as you transition to being more building oriented, that 30% production efficiency, that operates as an output modifier that just increases the number of goods produced. So if we have a building and that building is producing value, what it does is it only increases the output side. And so this really is way more valuable than it looks, because if we have a building that has 8 worth of inputs in terms of value and 10 worth of outputs, right now, the amount that we are putting out in terms of value is going to be 2, right? If we have that 30% production efficiency, what will happen if we increase the outputs by 30% is we'll go from 10 to 13, but now our margin, which is the amount that is being added to the tax base, goes from 2 to 5. So that's a 250% increase in the value that is being produced because we have to compensate for the margin. So production efficiency is a really strong modifier. It's just that production is not worth as much in the early game because I think it's more about RGOs and trade, and that the production comes later. Longer term, we need to think about our kind of geographic situation and also our vegetative situation. Geographically, we have a lot of hills and mountains, which kind of comes with the territory as it relates to some of these better resources, but the flatlands are going to be where we make our bigger cities, or are going to be very nice for big cities, and also anywhere on the coast, so we will have a nice power base here. Also, we can propagate control through the waterways eventually, so ideally, we'd like to make a power base here in the bay as best we can, and also look to push things. Now, coming in and looking at the vegetation, you can see we have some farmlands here. We'd love to push up into here. We're going to take a closer look at these. And also there is a little bit down here and down here in terms of grasslands and open areas we can look to control. We also... Okay, so we're going to take a closer look at the spreadsheet, hide your kids. We also just wanted to take a brief look at some of these numbers on these things and point out in particular climates, vegetation, and topography that is important to note. This pop capacity number, development gives up to, I think, 200% pop capacity. There's a lot of sources of percent pop capacity. This is not as important as flat pop capacity, and this is the primary thing that is going to be achieved in climate. Other than Arctic in particular is really bad, your climate is not overwhelmingly important, but the best one is going to be Mediterranean. But moving forward or on, vegetation is going to be really important. Your growth in terms of population and your migration attraction is going to have a lot to do with pop capacity. Farmland gives it gives double the next one in terms of pop capacity, which is an insane modifier, and it also has extra development growth. So farmlands specifically are just kind of, to compare these, are way better than the other options. Also, let's just sort by dev growth, because I think this is important to note. Jungle, forest, and woods are going to be pretty bad on the development growth. And so, in particular, you want more pop capacity and development growth where you put your cities. So, generally speaking, you should prefer not to put those things in these types of places. I think it's a little bit baity to look at the extra food production on the farmland and say, I want to keep it rural, I want to be able to generate as much food food as possible. There's other ways to get this food percentage modifier, so I don't think it's like the be-all end-all, but there's really not very good ways of generating pop capacity. There's like one building that gives you plus 1,000 pop capacity or plus 500, like the granary or something like that, but it overall is going to be very difficult to achieve. And the other really, really important distinction, other than farmlands being good, is mountains are absolutely terrible. Mountains have really, really strong negative modifiers. They're the only topography type that decreases pop capacity. They decrease it by 80%. Development growth, they decrease by 70%. You absolutely positively do not want to put a city on a mountain unless you are doing it for a particular strategic region that is, or you have nowhere else to put a city. Outside of these two things, it's going to be really, really bad in terms of locations, in terms of where you want to put your cities, which I think is the most worthwhile consideration overall, in terms of where it is you want to build, and also anything you do around where you want to put your cities. So if you are choosing to promote development growth, the cabinet action in a particular place, you would prefer to put it in places where you know you want cities, and prefer to put it in places that are flatland, farmland, and Mediterranean in terms of an absolute sort of preference. Enormous population. So generally speaking, you prefer to build close to the market center, which is over here in Kaesong at this point in time, but a concession towards sometimes you need to build in cities, and cities require population, and also you can run out of populations in places, is occasionally building closer to pops and sacrificing the fact that a building here is going to be 100% efficient, and a building over here is going to be as low as 25% efficient, or maybe 50% efficient, depending on both control and market access. In the bottom right corner, the river map mode takes forever to load, so we won't show it, but there's a river that goes through here, and there's a river that goes through here. A long-term strategic plan is going to be making a river canal system through to this top right corner, so that we can propagate control along the coast up here, and all. Notably, food production, this is kind of what we were talking about earlier, where you're losing, by making a city, you lose food production, but something like the Pound Lock Canal is an example of a way that you can rake it back, even if you have a city. Also one down here, so that we can propagate some control down into the right, where we have this major population center, and make use of those pops. In addition to control, some other things we are going to track are going to be our literacy rate. Now, literacy per pop is going to have different modifiers, just kind of looking through them briefly. You can see down here, research progress is informed by literacy. You see that percentage modifier, and it's worth mentioning that liturgical language, it scales up to 1, I believe. The best is Latin. It's proportionate scaling, so if you pull ahead on the metrics, you will have 1, and Latin will have less than 1. I believe it's informed by the number of clerics, or this type of thing, of that type of pop, that is in your country following your religion, or using your liturgical language, or something to this effect. But Latin is overwhelmingly the best, and it is also why they get roughly double the research base rate. But we could stack a lot of percentage modifiers, and this is one of the big reasons that we're pushing, in particular, literacy. But two other literacies that I think are particularly good, or more important than the other one, although flat cultural tradition is kind of nice, is going to be burgers. The trade capacity and the development growth, I think, are both fine modifiers, and peasant literacy, I think, is probably the best, not only because pop promotion speed is a really useful mechanic, because often you are throttled by the number of pops you have. You have peasants, but you don't have laborers. You need the laborers to operate the building, but also because, generally speaking, the highest proportion of pops in your locations are going to be peasants. And so peasants are best for pushing up your average literacy. There's a lot of weird things, but catering to the peasants is generally preferred as a result of them being disproportionately a high amount of your pops, and generally investing in them is not as expensive as I kind of think it should be. Also, our overall level of development, and finally, and probably development, some important things to note is minus building costs and also population capacity. So they will get you more pops, and then they will get you more buildings. I didn't come anywhere close to reaching the point of running out of peasants, but I anticipate the speed at which you can build buildings will outstretch your ability to have population growth, and at a certain point you run out of pops to work the buildings. This happens in Victoria 3, didn't experience it in EU5, but I am anticipating it. It is with that in mind that having a sensitivity towards growing pop over the course of the game is going to give you a higher top end at the end, and development really helps a lot for that. Now, population capacity, again, percentage modifier, I believe there's a flat one from having upgraded to city or town as well, most importantly. But that's why you care about population capacity. It gives you more population growth and migration attraction in particular. Our level of urbanization. Now, here are our estates, and I said, pause if you want to read. We are not going to go at them one at a time, but something I briefly wanted to mention is I think at this current juncture of balance, and this current juncture of balance is not all that important because things are going to change, giving all the estates away was really good. It's already worse because of the trade nerf, making it so your trade scales with crown power, because giving them away dilutes your crown power. I still think it's the case if we take a look at some of these ones that are peasant ones, that just giving estates to get satisfaction is really good, because the satisfaction, as we mentioned earlier, gives control, and when you give peasants the estates, that gives them this percentage power modifier, right? It's giving them happiness, it's giving them this percentage power modifier. If they have a really low base rate, an extra percent doesn't really help them out that much. You know, if you have a number 1 and a number 10 and you increase the number 1 by 25%, it's still ridiculously low, right? And so it doesn't dilute crown power as far as things are currently implemented. And so I still think, unless they make adjustments, giving all the estates to your peasants is really good. Also, in particular, we gave out more estates to the clergy and the nobility than we would otherwise, because our parliament was only clergy and nobility, so we actually wanted them to have more power. And we didn't care that much about the crown power. Crown power is good. It gives you production, trade, and tax efficiency, I think, are the big things. I'm not 100% sure on those numbers, but our estates, those are the ones. Here are a few other ones that we had, but this is just a massive amount of estates or privileges that we put in towards the estates, even ones where we're like, it's not even a positive modifier for us. We didn't care. We just wanted the combination of satisfaction, which increases control, and also incidentally kind of increases, or it also gives you modifiers when they are happy, but control as well, on the peasants especially, because they're disproportionately high. Building all those expensive resources with marketplaces at the outskirts, because these are again, trade really strong, but not going to give as much. In particular, they also give trade capacity to the burghers. The burghers get a bunch of their own trade routes that they can operate, and they generate profit off of. I believe it scales with the number of burger pops you have. This gives you 250, but I'm not sure exactly the scaling. But on top of that, this is going to give you plus 25%, and I don't know if this modifier stacks. So I don't know if this modifier is you build one marketplace, it's just 25%, or if you build 5 marketplaces, now it's up to 125%. That is kind of beyond me, but eventually the burghers having a bunch of trade routes starts to meddle with your ability to control prices and collapse prices, which we're going to talk about. Control, and then everything that we need to have close to the capital, like the masons, we are putting close to the capital. Masonry is going to be important, because if we can collapse the price on that, we can get a hefty discount on buildings. Now, masonry goes into most of the buildings, that is, like the production buildings, and wood goes into most of the RGOs. Ability to crash both of these in price, I think, is a really important gameplay pattern. I don't think it should be an important gameplay pattern, because what happens is you put in all the government spending, you build like 50 things at once, right? And then the price of masonry, because now there's more demand for masonry, the relationship between supply and demand determines price, then the price for masonry shoots up, and it's no longer this minus 66% price. Instead, it's this plus 100% price. But you locked everything out at the minus 66% price, so it could be the case that your average price of masonry is like plus 10%, but what it is you spike it up to 100, and then you wait for it to be minus 66, and then you spike it up, and then you keep the average low. But the idea is the amount of time, building's base cost is 50, right? The amount of time it takes for a building to replace its value, if it is producing plus 1 gold in value, right? Which is kind of a number that makes sense, at least at this point in the era of the game. If it is providing plus 1 in value, then the amount of time it will take is 50 months to replace itself. So having something earlier, rather than waiting to be able to collapse the price, you can generally save 33 gold by collapsing the price. You are not going to get something 33 months earlier, and so generally speaking, just having the thing earlier and accumulating the value over the course of XYZ months is not worth as much as collapsing prices, and this is generally the play pattern you should go towards. You can see here the price is minus 66%, and down from 50 we have it to 18.23. And we are going to do that for most buildings, even the ones that require more complex goods. We first collapse the price of the inputs, and then we invest in a massive wave of buildings. We also pick up our first law. Pause if you want to read our other. These are just a bunch of laws. I think that we'll keep this paused for like a little bit of a second, but in general, we are going for stuff that lets us lean into the burghers. Of particular note, I think one of the more important laws is obscured here, which is our burgher law. I think it was favored the burghers, except we have a unique name on our burghers, and this increases max tax for burghers by 10%. The burghers have a base of 20%, and then there's usually a modifier based on burgher power that decreases it by 10%, so this doubles the amount of tax you can put in on the burghers. I do think that this one is like notably strong, but in a lot of ways we're leaning into the burghers as well as developing towards the societal values we want. Lack of qualified individuals, in this case laborers, is one of the reasons we can't just keep pushing these resources. And you can see here, positive stability, strong. Free subjects, strong. Having a lot of control, strong. And there's the literacy of peasants modifier. Often, this is going to throttle whether or not you can... gold is so abundant right now in the game in terms of balance, and eventually gold might be the throttle for what you can do. But right now, your ability to get qualifications, which build up over time, is going to be the more important thing. You could look here, current employment, 1130, right? And you could look here how many laborers we're promoting per month. 16. That's a lot of months to fully employ this RGO, right? And so the modifiers for this are really strong. In particular, there is a really, really powerful, I think it's like overpowerful, you have to use it, a cabinet action, which gives you like plus 30, plus flat 30 or plus flat 50 promotion. Your base flat is 10. We were producing buildings that would also give plus 10, so our base was like plus 30, and so we got up to around plus 80-ish base, with assuming that we're getting 160% of that number as laborers, right, is instead 10 months to fully employ an RGO level, which is much, much better. And when the throttle is the employment, then any modifier you get towards that is really, really good. When the throttle's the gold, then gold becomes more important. Whatever is preventing you from expanding the economy is generally going to be the most important thing economically, and often it is promotion. It is also construction speed. In our case here in Korea, especially with the winters, early on construction speed was one of the things that throttle us, which incidentally towns and cities give construction speed. We use our cabinet here to encourage migration. Part of our long-term plan, we need a string of cities with 25,000 pops. We should have, in retrospect, developed a route here because it is the case that the hills, if we got them to have more control, we would have been able to go through a canal better. Now we're looking at our parliament. With our current setup, I don't know what exactly drives it. I think it's our government. Only the clergy and the nobility can participate in parliament, so only them you get to get juice from. In particular, parliament has some very important things in that is how you get the CB that you use in a lot of cases, and you need to get 50 support. So you can see here, support here is going to be, we can get a lot from our nobility because they have a lot of power, and so I think that this is one of the reasons why we don't really care that much about crown power early, is because we want to be able to get breakpoints of 50 or 100 support, and if we have weak estates, it's hard to get that amount of support. So having strong estates that are able to contribute to the voting, we don't have a picture of the voting, these are really, really, really valuable, and they will allow you to get the insult CB, which allows you to attack literally anyone, and so this is quite strong, although it's plus 100% cost to annex stuff, and it also allows you to get the more max taxes to create. Remember, we pointed out that law, which gave plus 10% tax to burghers in particular, or max tax to burghers, effectively doubling the amount you could tax. tax. This action that you could take for 50 parliamentary support also gives you a similar plus 10% to max taxes on all your estates. And so I think this is also particularly strong. We'll mention a couple things here. So for our parliamentary debates, generally we're going to want either conduct a census, because that's a lot of pop growth, or expand gravel road network. For now, this will be good for us because roads will be very good and very cheap for us right now, but it's more about progressing towards a centralization. Now, just very briefly, if you do a conduct a census, it won't be available next parliament. They're available every 5 years. I think generally conduct a census is really strong, so you kind of always push it. And if you do that, you will get zero support from putting forward conduct a census. So that means you have to give a 50 support worth of concessions to your estates. So having powerful estates that are voting for stuff is useful. Now, also, a big thing here is that this trend towards societal values is an important modifier. What this does is it creates an equilibrium you trend towards that is equal to 100 times that value. So in this case, we will trend towards 13 centralization. However, what happens is you need to have plus towards the opposite, so we have to have a plus towards decentralization to decay our centralization. So we will move to the 13 and then we'll stop, but if we were to get up to 20, we would just stop there and we wouldn't decay unless we had at least minus 0.01 decentralization attraction. And so what this does is this creates breakpoints. And it's really important to get over zero towards where you're trying to trend, but actually getting a lot of equilibrium push in a direction is much less important. And the reason why is we're trying to highlight is this changes us plus 10 towards centralization. So we just get to jump towards centralization. So if we go from 13 to 23, we won't decay down. And so what you need to do, generally speaking, how we've pushed centralization over the course of time, is we just do expand gravel road network 10 times. And as long as we have positive centralization, this will just get you to plus 100. And I think that's the way to do it. Be very good and very cheap for us right now, but it's more about progressing towards a centralization if you want to see the values we want to trend towards. I think these are probably worth exploring because these I think are really strong. We eventually wanted to trend towards capital economy. That's what this one is, minus buildings cost, and of course that production efficiency. We already took a look at this one earlier. Free subjects is also going to be useful to progress towards, largely off the pop promotion speed, but prosperity is quite nice. We don't show this in the video. Prosperity is easy to get to trend up to 100, and then what it does is it increases development. It is the driver modifier towards development, and you want to get prosperity to 100. So you want to have at least a couple sources of plus prosperity, but then additional marginal sources don't really matter that much because you often get up to 100. We have naval for the maritime presence primarily, but also distance cost capital through the maritime. Trade range also used overseas is okay. Innovative is plus 10 literacy, is kind of one of the bigger modifiers there that we care about, allowing us to research faster. With there being an abundance of money or gold in the economy as it stands right now with the current balance, which isn't necessarily going to stay, one of the main throttles for you is your ability to get technology. And so going innovative is kind of fine. I believe the other side of innovative is traditional, which is maybe slightly better economically, but you don't care. You just want to go innovative. Here's centralization in terms of what it is giving, plus crown power. This is way stronger than when we ran the run, but it also gives distance cost capital. Decentralization gives satisfaction. Satisfaction also gives control. There are situations where you will actually have more control from the plus estates satisfaction on decentralization, which isn't pictured here, than you will have on this minus distance cost capital, which is curious, but that's just the way the math works out. Plutocracy, we get burghers in towns and cities, plus 10%. We're primarily primarily taxing these pups, and so we kind of want them to be, we want our places to be disproportionately more burgher and peasants, because those are who we're taxing specifically, and then just make huge concessions to the nobles and clerics, but since they have low population numbers in locations, those concessions don't really mean a lot. Trade efficiency 1%, free money modifier, it just adds value. And then we have syndicized, which is kind of unique to the region, where we are going to be getting a monthly research progress up to 10%. So this is quite strong. So feel free to pause. Here is updated control around the capital after building some roads into it. Yep. At the start of every age, you will get the choice between 3 focuses, which will change your tech tree. We're going to go with administrative, and this is a feature I rather like here in EU5, is every playthrough can be customizable. You're going to choose what tech you get. You can only get around 50 to 75% per age, and so by choosing which techs you want to get, you are going to shape your country not just for that given age, but for all ages to come, as you will keep and retain these bonuses. So regarding technology, if anyone has any specific questions regarding tech or would like to see a video on tech, I do have all of the technologies recorded, and I can express them. I just can't show screenshots or video of any of the techs, but I do have everything recorded, although I anticipate that a lot of tech changes will occur between now and release in Age of Discovery through Age of Revolutions, but also wanted to comment a little bit on the tech tree specifically, because I think it does change things up a bit, and the way that I kind of conceptualize the tech tree, which is for every age that is not the Age of Traditions, because this is just like kind of a 5-year age. For every age, what you are going to experience is you are going to have an 3 institutions. Each one is going to be associated with either Diplo, administration, and military, and as you unlock the institution, you unlock the corresponding tech tree. Now, in here, we can see that we have New World, which is the diplomatic tech tree in the Age of Discovery, and generally speaking, what these will do is they will branch. Often it is 2 branches. New World is kind of a little bit of an exception, where it branches into 3. So you can see there's one branch off to the left, and it's its own thing. There's another branch down the middle, and there's a branch down to the right. And you can see that if you trace the lines, they do go pretty deep. And so this is the structure, is there are going to generally be 6 big branches that are going to be in the tech, and generally speaking, the best tech is at the bottom. And so what this creates is a situation that, since you can only research 50 to 70% of technology, this creates a situation where you have to decide what advantages you're going to go for and what concessions you're going to make. Tech, roughly speaking, replaces idea groups and national focuses. I forget the other thing, but it all gets folded on, in addition to technology, into advances in EU5 here. And the way I think of it is you can go really deep in maybe 2 of the 6 trees, and then 1 to 2 in the, you could go medium depth 1 to 2 of the trees, and a small depth 1 to 2 of the trees, something like this, depending on your research speed. And so you're going to need to choose what you specialize in. In particular, I give a little bit of some context. Age of Renaissance, I completely didn't touch the military tree in one of my games, and this was really, really rough because I couldn't produce manpower. This tree kind of has the first thing in which you can produce manpower, and I've also skipped military units entirely, and this has also led to some rough situations. So often going shallow in the tree, the Age of Renaissance, shallow in the tree has the building that allows you to get manpower, and shallow in Age of Discovery, it gets kind of the introductory military unit. I think that you can go a little bit shallow in the tree, but skipping military entirely is not going to be that great, but deeper in the tree, there's a better military unit for that age, and so you have to decide what's going to be important for you. You can also get kind of rewards a little bit for slingshotting, though, by not going the military tree in Age of Renaissance, right? We get to research a bunch more other techs, and then when we hit Age of Discovery and we unlock the Age of Discovery military units, now we've effectively gotten a payoff, even though that made the Age of Renaissance rougher for us. And so with our Milan game specifically, we leaned on mercenaries, or that was the idea. Mercenaries were kind of a little bit bugged, that we would lean on mercenaries and then Age of Discovery, get a standing army and something like this. And so you can make dynamic moves around, your technology choices, and you could also go back into a previous age and research. You get a discount. I think it's like 10% and just always 10%. I don't think it scales or something like this. I don't think it scales up having more ages back, which I think it probably should, but at the current state of things, you do get a discount, but it's probably not worth it to go back and research old tech, generally speaking, because what happens is, generally speaking, the tech gets stronger as you get into deeper ages, and also the tech gets stronger as you get closer to the bottom of the tree. And so this kind of informs your strategy, where you are going to need to choose some specialization, and then often probably worth getting the building that gives you manpower in the Age of Renaissance, or allows you to recruit manpower. It's like a barracks or something. And this is going to be informing play in a pretty substantive way, I think. In the Korea game specifically, we really sacked military in the Age of Renaissance, or didn't really get too much until close to the end of the age. And the reason for this is we had a unique building, the Korean barracks, which we'll see a little bit later when we also see the loud car outside. And the Korean barracks was a source of manpower, and so we kind of didn't need it. And then we were in a military situation where we were leaning on our navy quite a lot, and so I felt that we didn't need as much military. But let's continue. By choosing which techs you want to get, you are going to shape your country not just for that given age, but for all ages to come, as you will keep. So you can see here the structure we were talking about, where we are having two branches, and these go down kind of this thing, and it definitely feels like you are choosing branches, so you're making decisions about what you're committing to. Generally, the 3 techs that are at the start of each branch, when it's one of these branch, 3 techs, later branches or more branches, generally they're not very strong. Keep and retain these bonuses. We wait until we collapse the price and then take loans to upgrade 7 towns at once, which... This is a big thing. You're getting that 66% discount, right, when you collapse the price. And that 66% discount, if you're evaluating the cost of paying interest, the interest is inconsequential relative to a 66% discount on the production cost of the buildings. Also, we do get a screenshot of what's going on between rural settlements and towns, and some distinctions. This plus maximum RGO size, this is the main reason why we have said that a reason to not upgrade something to a town or city is going to be if you have a really good resource there. So anything that is not a farmland, I think, and has a really good resource, you'll want to strongly consider not upgrading it. We also see the food production plus 10%. I think this is a little bit baity to be leaving stuff rural on behalf of food production, generally speaking, but some places maybe are low on food, a little bit low on this type of thing. Also, if you have a place that only has a little bit of rice, rice does produce more food, which we looked at a little bit earlier in terms of relative to other food resources. We also see towns giving possible nobles, clerics, burghers. What this does is this really smooths out the pace of play with the possible burghers and like this type of thing, because when you produce a burgher building, a lot of them require 250 pops to employ, and you can have this possible plus 200 means you will have burghers sitting there unemployed, and your location can promote up burghers and have 200 unemployed ones. The building finishes, it's almost completely employed, and then promotion continues. And so it unlocks effectively like a capacity in a sense. And so these are strong modifiers as well. We also see max control, allowing you to make use of things a bit better. This is a big part of the reason. And we also see the flat plus population capacity. 20k for a town, and then if we just wait just a moment, control and allow us to build newer types of buildings, more of the production, we will see that our flat capacity for population is going to be plus 100k. So this is quite a lot. The farmland, if we just take a brief look, hide your kids, the farmland was really, really strong. It gave plus 100k, but this differential gets diluted out. So if we're comparing a farmland to a grassland and we're keeping it rural, that's double, right, in terms of the population capacity. If we are comparing a city on each of them, it's 200k flat versus 150k flat. So while the farmland is still absolutely crushing the grassland, it's still just a 25 or 33% difference depending on the perspective that you operate from. Oriented buildings, generally. Also, an additional 5% control, and also if you are gated by construction speed, you are getting more construction speed here. You're also getting more in development. You want to try and think of what it is you're gated by, and then try and find ways to unlock that. So in our Korea run, we had tons and tons and tons of money. We were often gated by construction because we had winters that impede construction, and so upgrading stuff was disproportionately useful here relative to our Mali or Milan runs. Speaking, when evaluating this, you want to not build over good resources or bad terrain or vegetation, but in this case, it all works for us to just be building around the capital. The mountains, really, the negative modifiers on mountains are so substantive that you don't want to upgrade to these things. Where we have a lot of control and market access, we start to build some roads connecting the very best resources like gold and gems to the capital of that. So this is important to note to just kind of explain this. There's a distance cost between every location, and the flat amount that all distance costs, even if it's seas or over land, is 40. A bunch of things reduce this, and the increased proximity allows you to get more control. And so the reduction from 40 to 20 is enormous for the gravel roads. It's for the next tier road, paved road, it's a 25% reduction, and so that's going to still be very strong. The first one cuts it in half. The second one, relative to the status quo, cuts it by 25% with the paved roads. Again, just wanted to note, as far as the game is right now, and I think this is what we noticed, but I also think it's a bug. I put in a bug report for it. You only get market access from roads, and you don't get it from naval infrastructure. And so I expect that to change, but if that's not the case, roads are going to become critically important, as they are going to be the thing that gives you the most market access. But with us coming in here in the rural areas and getting these for the mines, we are improving the price that we are paid on the mines, because we are improving the market access to them that are nearby to give us more control, to give us more output. So we've hit a bit of an inflection point where we have a robust enough economy that we can start going for buildings that don't really benefit the economy, but instead benefit the nation, like the Confucian school here. Again, we talked about how the base pop promotion speed, plus 10, this effectively doubles it, and so when this is a throttle for you, this is going to be really good. Library as well is going to be the generic building. We have the Confucian school. I think every country that's Confucian is going to get this. We get progress towards synicized, which is a societal value, and I think we liked it because it gives plus 10% tech, and then max literacy, this is going to be good because this is just generic max literacy. A lot of it is qualified max literacy. I think that max literacy is not very good on the clerics, because I was looking at them and some of them have 100% literacy. So if you have 100% literacy, getting more max literacy is stone useless, because you can't have over 100% literacy. But this is going to apply to the peasants, and so it is going to increase the research speed, or it's going to apply to everyone. Fusion School, which is unique to the Koreans, we've already collapsed the price, so we're going to spam them everywhere. If we look at our economy, we're still wildly profitable per trade power on all of our trades, so we're going to keep doing what we're doing, to kind of back up a little and explain, this gear is an indication whether you want something automated or not. We are automating everything, and it is trading. It optimizes for the most profitable trade. If you have a strategic reason to put in a trade, which we definitely had throughout the course of this run, what you can do is you can check this box, and this will lock in the trade. But in particular, I think just trading for money, especially at this juncture, is going to be the strategy we employ. This is almost certainly suboptimal, because if there is a really, really good industry, it might be the case that we actually want to export to drive up the price of that industry, so we can skew our economy disproportionately towards that. And this is what kind of one of the emergent effects we get from prices. So we won't go into too great a detail, but we have weapons right here, right? It could be the case that we want to lock in more weapons sell orders to increase the price of weapons. Because if we have, let's say the input for weapons, the total cost is 5 ducats. That's not buckets of ducats, that's a few ducats. And then the output is 10, right? If weapons are at minus 25% price, right, then we will only get an output of 7.5, and so the margin will be 2.5 per building. Let's say the PM on the weapons is insane. It could be the case that we want to export more weapons. As we export more weapons, that will create more buy orders. The buy orders drive up the price. If we move from minus 25% cost on weapons to plus, or to even price on weapons, then our margin will go from 2.5 to 5, and so you increase the margins. I think that there's probably going to be trades that you want to lock in for reasons such as this, or trades that you want to lock in for various other reasons, but I think that the status quo is going to be just let it automate, because otherwise you would have to look for each best route, and you would have to do this constantly updating it, and that would be so incredibly tedious. And so I don't think that this is a concession to letting the computer think for you, but rather a way of facilitating a certain heuristic, which is just trades for profit, and when you want to deviate to that, you lock in trades. Per trade power on all of our trades. That's a lot, but it's going to be a fraction of a trade power that's getting used there. So this is maybe something that we kind of want to highlight a little bit. This is the amount of trade power we are using in each of the trades. Often it is quite low. Here you can see on this, it's 0.02. So wildly profitable, but just for that little bit. The UI is such that inputting like a number like this is kind of annoying. And this is another reason why. Could you imagine trying to balance these exact quantities to make the most money? It's going to be rough. Something we could have done, though, is we could have force exported a lot of jewelry. Move and look at the balance. Also, to collapse other people's jewelry economies is maybe a reason to dump goods to prevent them from building it. This is an example of another strategic reason. I don't know what's strong, though. We are making 400 in trade, less than 140 in trade expense, and we're making a little bit of money in the taxes. What I'm trying to say is the economy is going really well. Something to also note, we do have the automation things here. When you click automate, it will automate towards trending you towards 50% satisfaction, although throughout we didn't really mess with this too much. We knew that we had so much satisfaction from all of the privileges we had granted to our estates that we were never going to hit 50% anyways, and what this effectively did for us is locked in max taxes whatever we did, because we knew it wouldn't trend us down. In particular, when your guys dip below 50%, you start to get some nasty events, I think, and they start building worse buildings. I think the buildings, though, scale proportionally to satisfaction, where there's a bunch of junk buildings that are just like strict negative, or almost strict negative. They increase the number of potential like clergymen, burgers, this type of thing, but other than that, they increase food requirements for those pops, and so generally speaking, it's bad. They will build better buildings as you move towards that. We haven't observed this effect in a large enough sample size to really know how we feel about it, and this is also one of the effects that's going to determine how valuable estates getting money is, and this is something we have to investigate. But if estates invest relatively intelligently, then the fact that estates are getting some of this trade money now with the trade nerf, some of this trade money, and notably they will be getting trade profit, not trade income. This is kind of irrelevant. It is really just the same income, and it will stimulate the economy. Them spending will drive up the prices of construction goods, and then the construction goods are more profitable. But with the current play pattern, you don't like that. You just want to collapse prices. And so maybe the fact that it prevents you from collapsing prices is a further gameplay pattern that is interesting. I hope nothing bad happened. So the Black Plague hits. No. Hopefully it doesn't kill too many of our pops. So 1.2 million of our 3 million pops died of the plague, but at least little Timmy's gonna make it home for Christmas. Yes! I'm being told little Timmy's not gonna make it home for Christmas. Overall, this is kind of 40% of the pops is relatively good performance. We're not sure the best strategy on this yet, but yeah, we don't know what it is. This event is really rough. It really informs a lot of kind of gameplay patterns. It happens around the same time, in 46. It really kicks you in the nuts. It's interesting. I rather like it. Here, we also have the modifier character life expectancy on the hospital. Sorry, my big head blocks it. This applies notably only to characters, not to pops, so it doesn't increase your effective pop growth. We see that I think isolating cities is really strong. Bubonic plague impact. I know some players who played on islands, or I think one of the players who played on an island, I forget who it was, they completely stopped trade, and since they were on an island, they could completely isolate themselves, which is a little bit of an interesting thing, but we didn't get to do that. We did kind of see different ways of fighting the plagues, though. In order to rebuild, we are building settlements everywhere. The depop 1% population growth is an insane modifier. I think, generally speaking, if you can build these anywhere, you really, really want to go about building them. There is a key requirement in that they have to have under 5% of their current pop capacity. That's what this green hover says. And they have to be built in a rural area. with this is one of the reasons to not upgrade to cities and towns is that, or cities, towns and cities, is because population growth 1% is insanely high. When a bunch of your pops die, then this is generally going to be possible to build this in a lot of places after the Black Plague with most of the runs. Remember that our conduct a census, which we were already hyping up, that had 0.5% population growth for just half a year. This is just 1%. It's not applied to a city, which would be preferable, but we got some enormous towns in this Korea run down in the southwest corner as a result of having a bunch of settlements, and we intentionally did not build over areas that would otherwise be good to build. Flatlands with not very good resources. Populated areas allow us to build settlements, and this has a ton of population growth. Also, in a ton of our areas, the qualified people are dead, so it's going to take a while to recover, and even if we build more buildings, it won't do anything. If we add cotton here, there's still not enough workers to work everything. Notably, I think slavery is super meta because slaves bypass qualifications at this current point in time. If they're in a location, they will just work the building, and you can move them around, and this is a great way to make sure you can get value out of RGOs that you otherwise, for whatever reason, can't get worked, whether you don't have enough population there, or that population doesn't have the qualifications. In particular, after the Black Plague, I think importing a lot of slaves, or creating a lot of slaves and shuffling them around is probably a really strong play pattern. Following the Black Death, we did a massive rebuild project, putting in a bunch of bridges, roads, and things that employ people that weren't burghers or laborers, because bridges notably to take laborers, but we kind of wanted to build infrastructure overall. They were all dead. Stuff like schools as well as temples. This is the Korean barracks, monthly manpower 5. This is a relatively weak manpower building compared to the barracks, which can be built multiple levels, and I don't know how much it gives, but the idea is we didn't have to go into the tech tree in order to build this. Temple can be built in a bunch of places, max control, very nice, max literacy for clergy, a little bit of a meh. We took on a massive, because they already have max, I think, in a lot of cases. We'd have to check and watch this carefully. Amount of debt in order to do this, knowing we would spike prices for some time. Collapsed prices means that interest on debt is completely irrelevant from your spending perspective. If you want to build something and you have the prices collapsed, you take debt as much as you need. We also converted a bunch of towns to cities, settlements to towns, and we are looking to make sure that they are never idle. So here is also our current level of urbanization, which the never idle comment I think is probably worth emphasizing a little bit here, is a reason why we never wanted to have them idle is one thing that was throttling us was not money. We had tons and tons of money. What was throttling us in particular was the number of locations we could build certain types of buildings in, especially ones that were close to both our capital / market center. And so, you also see the previous control here that kind of just blends in and maybe is a little bit, or previous urbanization, but this is the comparison, and we are just trying to keep it going. Come up also very notable is we did add a city. This is going to be the future capital here, and is quite a bit more expensive, so things are coming quite along, and in terms of our decision making, 5x the cost, starting to draw towns versus cities towards the 2 canals we want, because the towns will grow a little bit better in population, so we're setting ourselves up for that. We annex our northern neighbor here. Notably, we did annex them through a personal union, which on the version we received, the AI did not resist personal union escalation, and so this was trivial. We had the opportunity to annex both Ming and Yuan during the course of this run, but I didn't, because I thought that would kind of just ruin the video, but we in particular did want to occupy this area in the bay, so we got the opportunity to annex them like this, and it was much more straightforward, so we went with it. With this, we gain an additional economic challenge / opportunity, which is now we have 2 markets, which adds a layer of complexity. Before we were just collapsing prices in the Kaesong, now we need to collapse prices in Liaoyang if we want to build within that market. But we have a new opportunity in the sense, and this might be something that's very powerful, that we have market access in yet another spot spawning it, so we have opportunities for profitable buildings if we can manage prices. So just kind of want to go back here a second. This, in particular, I don't know how strong this is because it seems like it's easier to propagate market access as the game goes on. So I don't know if you want to create more markets to create more market access, or if you just want to allow your market access to ramp up. For anyone who's played Victoria 3 and remembers the old days when you would leave a market, you would have way too much supply of some things, way too much demand of other things, and it would often ruin your economy. We have considered that the metagame of creating additional markets is really, really strong. So in the bottom right corner here, I think this is maybe a reasonable place to create a new market because we have a bunch of pops there and we have a bunch of buildings there and they will have better market access. So rather than have 80% output on all those buildings, right, they would have 95 to 100% output as a result of having market access. I don't know how strong a play pattern this is for creating market centers. Also, market centers in particular have buildings that they can build only in the market center, and this is quite strong and allows you to get more trade power per thing or trade power per location. However, I think often you have to shuffle resources back and forth between your economy more often. It kind of ruins whatever setup you've made because in Kaesong here, we might produce wood up here and masonry down here or something like this. When we create a new market, it messes up the balance. And so this is something that is probably going to require a bunch of investigation to determine whether or not it's better because I don't know if it's going to occupy too much trade power to fix your market in exchange for the additional market access, or if the additional market access is more worth such that it's worth kind of messing up your market a little bit in order to gain the extra access on your buildings, which adds in the something that's very powerful. For profit going to be some critical techs for us to acquire here. These, importantly, are going to be giving us monthly sailors, which are going to allow us to build a bunch of barks. We don't have a ton of sailors right now. You can see +5. We don't have any barks, and we just also end up researching the barks. Really hard to gain maritime presence here without the bark in the first building, and you can see how deep in the tree it is. This is the Age of Renaissance, relatively deep in the tree, and so if you want to propagate control as a result, in order to gain a bunch of, if you want to propagate control through waterways here, this is a huge commitment to make in terms of our research strategy because we've taken a deep tree in order to gain access to this. So a lot of people had commented in some various places that they thought that the way that we got control was too easy. This is a huge commitment. We went deep in the tree to be able to get dock and bark in order to allow this. Also, there is a distant capital cost through port, which is going to reduce the amount of distance we travel. We mentioned that the distance to travel through a location is 40. You can get, in terms of maritime presence, if you have a bunch of maritime presence, right, if you take this commitment and you buy a bunch of these boats and you pay the upkeep on these boats, because you can see this naval maintenance is going to be a requirement as well, and this is also our construction requirement. And also remember, these things are heavier and you don't want to trade them, so this is easier or cheaper to do if you have these things locally. We didn't have any local tin, but we did have local copper. These are the commitments we're making in order to be able to propagate stuff later, and we didn't really mention the investment level that had been made, also building all the ships, paying for all the ships, these types of things, but this is part of the infrastructure. In particular, distance cost capital to report, I think, is also a really strong modifier in order to integrate these newly acquired territories and properly spread control to them. This is the current sad state of affairs when it comes to maritime control over our waters. So this is the current sad, kind of taking a look at maritime presence and what it is giving here. It is going to help both trade and control. I didn't take a close look and I wasn't watching carefully the trade, but my understanding is as you build up maritime presence, this also makes it take less trade power to move stuff through the ocean. This is really, really powerful. We didn't talk about it at all in the video, but if it takes us 20% less trade power, then that means our margins get way bigger, or 20% less trade power to sustain a route. So let's say we're moving a gold for 1 trade power to a different market. Now it's only 0.8 trade power. Now we can go do something else with our trade power, and it effectively is giving us 25% more trades if that's what we're getting. So this is also a payout for this investment, but this is only worth worth it if you're sending a bunch of trade through the ocean, which in the case of Korea, we really are. So this commitment to the maritime presence through the ocean, and this commitment to the area in the tree, and this commitment to trading overseas, all of this being good is informed by our material condition at the start of the game, which as Korea is a peninsula in a sea, and so it is we're super like adjusted towards this type of thing. And then if your material conditions at the start are way different, you're going to want to end up playing differently. And so, what I'm trying to say is your conditions are really informing what is going to look meta or what is going to feel meta. When we were playing Mali, a lot of our trade did not go through the ocean. So one of the advantages of maritime presence wasn't as strong. And a lot of our best locations weren't on the coast. And so with playing Mali, I think we went as deep in the tech tree to get a lower tier building, and then we skipped out on the dock and bark. And then we got the next tier up in terms of the trade ship or this type of thing. So we skipped it, had it be a push, and instead invested our tech in other ways. Bad state of affairs when it comes to maritime control over our waters. This is the proximity map mode, which shows how much logistical power is spent to travel one unit within your empire. Base 40, and then you get a ton of things to reduce it. Currently, to travel one of these sea segments, we're spending around 31. We can get that down to about 3 with enough maritime presence and other modifiers. Here's an updated look at development. You can see that the mountains, which have a negative modifier for development, are starting to show through on our development map mode. And here's a look at literacy, where you can see all the infrastructure we have been building, the civilian infrastructure. In particular, library is available to everyone, 5% max literacy, and it is also giving flat pop promotion that if you don't have any other flat pop promotion, this represents a doubling. So this is quite a strong building, and you're going to want to go for it if your throttle is promotion of pops, which it often can be. And notably, I think it's worth looking at what is required in the production. We see introduced 3 more goods to kind of our production loop. And so what I think you do is you expand the base economy, wood and masonry, until it's churning pretty good, and you're also getting good income. And then you start building paper, books, and tools, right? And then you get a bunch of libraries, and then your places can employ up better. And so there is like kind of a little bit of a phasic structure to the initial windup, but you are going to want to collapse prices before you sort of go for it. Also, the scriptorium, which employs kind of the book thing, or the scriptorium where you build the books. In particular, this building is not employed by burghers. It's one of the few production buildings that is employed by clerics, which is interesting, but thinking of things in terms of cascading effects and like stuff being attached to each other, let's say you want to push more clerics for whatever reason, like this could increase the power of your liturgical language and allow you to research faster. What you can do is you can overbuild books. Now you are getting more cleric pops, right? And then you're like, oh, well, the price of books now is really cheap, and I've invested 20% of my economy in books. This is terrible because now the profits are really bad and it doesn't add a lot to the tax base, right? Well, looking back at kind of our really scuffed drawing, if books are down at 5, we can export them in order to ensure that we get the value. So now we can force export books. So this is an example of when strategically exporting might be relevant, is we take the less profitable export route of books, push the price of 5 up to 12, let's say, on the books, and what we get in return is now we can start recomping the population that is present in our country according to our own design by making a concession to a less profitable trade route so that we can increase the proportion of pops that are not burghers but are rather clerics instead, if that makes some sense. Is making a big difference. Largely because it's a better natural harbor, which will let us disembark for cheaper. We move both the capital and market center to Inju. I think this play pattern is really strong, having really strong harbor capacity on a coast where you have a market center. I think it's really strong if you can gain market access specifically through the sea zones. But if your capital's on the coast, you're still gonna be able to gain proximity and control. Again, this is a thing we've noted that I think is bugged. I'm not sure, and I think this is worth noting. But assuming it's bugged and it gets fixed, what's going to be the case is having markets on the coast is going to be really powerful because we decrease the distance cost or the proximity cost of things, and so this means not only can we could trade better with this because this reduces our trade rate. I believe that this makes our trades more efficient, but we can also gain market access through this and make all of our production buildings more efficient and in a way sort of industrialized. Over here, this requirement must be built in a capital, and this is one of the capital buildings. There's quite a few. They're generally strong. You build them in the capital, proportionally stronger the bigger your country is, but that's just kind of intuitive. Start building some capital buildings we've been holding off on. So just by getting a tiny bit of merchant marine and building docks between both of the capital and this little peninsula, we've reduced the distance of the segment from 30 to 13. So we upgraded 14 settlements up into towns, so urbanizing quite a bit here, and radiating outward from the capital where we have market access and control in particular. Also, this town into a city. We do need to make a line of cities, and to that end, we are still promoting migration along this line. We need to get each of these settlements/towns up to 25k pop before we can upgrade it to a city, giving us powerful bonuses from it being a city, but more importantly, lets us build a specific building. We are going to add a couple slaver buildings, which, given, Korea's history with slavery, is RP, but more importantly, it's going to allow us to send people to the frigid north where they... I think we commented on this a little bit, but I do think slavery is hyper meta because with qualifications, we were pointing out that we were having problems. Slaves don't need qualifications. They don't have to promote from peasant to laborer. They can always work in RGOs, and in particular, in the frigid north, we don't have a lot of pops, and so slaves are very strong for getting those RGOs working, and I think in any situation where you have difficult to get employment in RGOs, slaves are going to be very strong. Something that is worth noting, though, you can't enslave people of your culture or a culture you accept, and you cannot enslave people of the same religion. I believe these are the two requirements. We were kind of confused as the requirements at various times in which we were playing, and so this is going to be a little bit of a thing. You could technically, I think this is a bug, and so it might get fixed, but you could technically produce the slave good without producing the slave pop, but what it does is it takes 200 pops in your location and it turns them into slaves as it produces a good, and if you export that good to another market, it will send the pops along with it. And so this is the way it works. In particular, they all stay at the slavers until you export them, but then once you export them, then they will go and fill RGO buildings, which is kind of what we're trying to do to fill the Arctic/North. They understandably don't really want to go and work. This is the building we were referring to earlier, the Pound Lock Canal, which reduces the distance cost to capital. If you stack enough modifiers that decrease this, you will hit a floor of 1 distance, and that is a lot easier to hit if you have 5 of these Pound Lock Canals. In particular, the stacking of modifiers, I think, is a little bit weird when you start to get to the really low modifiers or you start talking about discounts. This applies, and this makes it so that overland, you can turn those 40 cost, which is traveled very much faster by a loud car, you can turn this into 1, which I think is strong. I kind of prefer when modifiers stack in a different way, which is 1 over 1 plus X, or this type of thing, where if you get plus 100%, it's half the time or whatever, or half the distance. But this is like a mathematical preference for modifiers because of how stacking, as you approach 100, the modifier gets stronger and stronger. But that's one thing. Also wanted to point out anything that's a city, because this is... Here we see this 3, it requires that it be built in a city. This is requiring it be built on a river. Anything that is on a river, you could expect to eventually get 25% food production as you eventually build this Pound Lock Canal, which is one of the reasons why we said kind of ignore the fact that you're getting less food, in the cities. It's not that big a deal because you eventually recoup the modifier when you build this building. Notably, something I think also worth mentioning, this does have a production method, but it doesn't make any money. The way that this works is this extracts money from the tax base. There are almost certainly some cascading effects from this, We haven't thought about it too much, but just wanted to point that out. Distance, and that is a lot easier to hit if you have 5 of these pound lock canals. So this is the canal. This is very much the idea. We will get started on these right away, doing a 5 drop, starting to head out towards the coast this way. If we take a look at our control, we should be able to see we're starting to get hundreds in a few places, but once we finish these canals, that 100 or the kind of higher numbers will start to spread over. A lot of people have been commenting that you could get control way too easy, you shouldn't be able to get 100. The way I view it is, when you have 100, you have fully unlocked the province, and that it's not something where 100 is this crazy thing, but instead, the way you look at it is, in the Age of Renaissance, you maybe get a radius of 2 for your 100 plus 100s. Although 100 is fairly good, part of it is we have really high satisfaction on our estates. And then in the next stage, you get 4 radius, so instead of being out these 2 like locations here, we'll be out 4, and then in the next stage maybe we're out 6. We get most of the peninsula covered and this type of thing, but overseas is a little bit dodgy, and the idea being not the existence of hundreds is the kind of the question, but how many of them you're getting and how many you could properly utilize. Notably, not much tax is being collected out here, which is also why we're just mostly constructing here where we have a lot of control. Into this area, 50-year update here. Here's our maritime presence, and here's how it's related to control. We can see that Siosam is now connecting to Inju via this bay, which is why they are able to get 100 control there. Increasingly, we're going to see that on the entirety of the west coast. Also related to control is, I think, an important play pattern, which is that we have released several subjects. That's because we can't really propagate control out there, but they can, and so this allows. I think this is going to be a very critical and frequent play pattern. There are a couple things going on that I just kind of want to point out, is your costs are based on your tax base, which incidentally is one of the reasons why you prefer to extract value from trade, but your costs of government upkeep are based on your tax base. When you release a country, right, and you have them instead paying you money, you reduce your costs because you've released tax base as well. And so, okay, you're not getting the income directly yourselves, but they're paying you a tribute. But if we have 10 control out there, we're not really generating that much income anyways. Although, the 10 is not going to reduce our cost that much either. But it's possible that when you release subjects, you actually generate more income as a result of control. I think let's kind of go back a little bit here. You notice this 36 up in here. This might be a little curious. There's a building called the Bailiff, which is able to give you base control, but it's just like a baseline of control. It doesn't push up control. It just puts you at 30. If you're lower, other than that, it doesn't do anything. We in particular build them where the mountains, where it's difficult to get infrastructure, but for whatever reason, I think it's because the provinces were cored, we didn't want to release them to a subject west coast. So let's kind of come back in here. We can't really propagate control out there, but they can, and so this allows us to get some usage out of this territory by having these subjects a little bit far away. Also coming into literacy, we have a bunch of things that are adding to literacy, and we currently have the highest in the world as far as we know it, beating out everyone by quite a nice margin in the places where we have upgraded settlements to towns. This is also our level of development. We are doing very, very well in the capital, but we've been encouraging development in this capital province the entire time, and it does have some key locations that we are going to use to connect these canals and develop. In particular, we're talking about the way it goes south like this, and thinking of building pound lock canals to get lower proximity so that we connect these areas in the south much more. You see these 20s, that's not very good. It helps to propagate control because every percentage of development is going to decrease the distance needed for the capital. But also, just wanted to note how interestingly the development map mode lines up very, very neatly. I think we put this with the topography map mode, because that is a negative drain on development. So you do see that very strong correlation there. There are a couple of inflection points in the market for us here. First of all, it is difficult for us to collapse the price of wood. The burghers will import it to base price, but the more advanced goods, which we have started to dabble into in order to build these higher tier buildings, they do require wood, and so it is harder for us to get wood cheap in the economy as I wanted to comment briefly on the burgers trades. I'm not 100% sure if it's done proportionate to your amount of trade power or trade capacity or proportionate to the number of burgers, but they get their own trade routes, which they make money on. They generally try and solve shortages, and when they start getting enough trade routes, the thing is if you have an excess of lumber, which is what pushes the price of lumber down, what they do is they export it, which is really obnoxious. Currently, there's not a way to stop the export, and so eventually you get this kind of scenario where the free lunch of minus 66% cost on everything ends a little bit. This probably means that there's maybe strategies where you really want to expand all your RGOs before you get a lot of trade or before you get a lot of burgers in particular, because that is going to create a play pattern where you are going to be losing out on your ability to collapse the price of lumber such that you can get the RGOs, because most RGOs build out of lumber, a few of them build out of tools. And so this is kind of what we're experiencing. It is a little bit painful in the sense that it doesn't feel really good. And so we might just have to tolerate buying stuff at base price for wood. We also see manufactured goods reaching kind of the higher level here in our trades list in both porcelain and lacquerware. We regret actually building a lot of lacquerware because one of the inputs was wood. In particular, this can also inform your strategy as it relates to what you want to build, where even if lacquerware is the most productive thing, it generates the biggest amount of money both through trade and production. However, if it effectively increases our prices because it's pushing up the price of wood, because wood is an input for lacquerware, then it is a mistake to build it because it will in fact reduce the amount that you can construct. So this is something I think we made a pretty big mistake on here. We probably should have tried to build zero lacquerware and even potentially force imported it to ourselves because it is a need of one of our pops, even though the routes might not be profitable, so as to avoid a situation where our burgers build it. I don't know if our burgers try and build buildings that are the most profitable or if they try and solve shortages or what exactly it is that they do, but this skewering our economy through an import such that we produce less of a thing that has a negative kind of secondary effect of pushing the wood price up is definitely something you could consider, which we could produce, which is something that's unique to the East. I don't know who all can produce it, but we also see that we're getting under 1 gold per trade power on some of our lower tier trades, and so we are going to be having a shift where we are starting to develop and earn a little bit less from trade. You can see we are getting around 500 from trade. The income The margin, importantly, is going down here. We're making 1,100, we're minus 600. Trade really starts to fall off. It starts to fall off kind of in a big way after the first 150 years. However, there's no phase of the game where I felt that trade was a worse source of income than taxes. But now, since trade's been nerfed, and also I think that it's probably, as we mentioned a while back, we're thinking of things not in terms of trade versus tax, but instead RGO versus building, because your levers are not trade and tax as much as they are RGO or building, because you intend with each building or RGO to extract value in both tax base and through trade, or whatever your trade strategy is going to be. Less the expense and a little bit more from taxes, although still mainly from trade. We are getting around 230 from taxes here. Also, a point we wanted to make is that the place where we had 55 market access at the start of the video, or 53, as a result of all of our reductions in proximity, now it has more market access. It's up to 69%, and so it is more profitable to build outward. Since we are switching to being more manufacturing minded here, it's worth pointing out something we've been playing around this entire time, which is that there are negative modifiers due to market access, but there's also positive modifiers, and one that we kind of wanted to point out is that there is vertical integration. By having iron, which is an input for tools, here in this location, we get plus 10% production, and we also have 4 levels in the building, so there's economies of scale. So even this makes it so that in order to really get the building and construction right, you have to build the right thing in the right place, which is interesting, but this can get really tedious when done at scale. One of the things I left feedback on, one of the 2 things I left feedback on that I would really like to see, and we'll see if we see it, is some form of auto-expansion metric where you can decide to auto-expand something and set parameters, or have some generically good parameters where if the prices are good enough, the building's fully employed, the building's profitable, so in the case of tools, let's say if the masonry is cheap enough, the tooling workshop is fully employed, the tooling workshop is profitable, it will automatically queue up a building. And the reason why I think this is so important is because we know where we're going to want to build tools. We're going to want to build them where we have iron or copper or whatever has a tools kind of PM, but we don't necessarily remember where all that is. So it'd be preferable that we could set it to auto expand. Also, we don't want to have 2 paper places in one place, 2 paper places in another place, 2 linen places in place A, 2 linen places in place B, because we would rather have 4 in each of those locations of one singular building. And the reason for this is because the economies of scale factor right here. And so auto expand also would help to ensure that you are getting the most out of your economies of scale. But the kind of larger point is, I think automation is going to be kind of important for the people who really care about the economics perspective, and also where you build stuff does matter, and this can overcome a pretty good amount of penalties that you're receiving otherwise. You could see that we are getting in this first scrum of 3 plus 9%, plus 14, plus 24, plus 27. Let's call it plus 30 because we're feeling good. This plus 30%, 1.3 times 0.8, we are overcoming the penalty from market access and getting up to 100% or a little bit above as a result of all our positive modifiers, I think, or just shy, actually, rather. We have a level 4, it should be producing 4, instead it's producing 3.92, but it's still relatively effective, and especially when you get below 100%, generally speaking, modifiers are going to get more and more useful. But the market access, I think, is multiplicatively applied with all these modifiers here. So even though we have this negative market access modifier, market access changes the output on which these percentages are applied, so you're not getting additive percentage modifiers with the market access. It's multiplicative with other modifiers. Due to the loud car outside, we are still producing 4 tools with a level 4 tools guild here in this province location. We won't be able to show it here because we can only show the Age of Renaissance, but it is noteworthy that you can unlock higher tier buildings, which will allow you to specialize in goods and allow you to export the particular things and import from people who are getting different ones. And they're not kind of thing I wanted to point out that we've already talked about, but just kind of as a reminder, we noticed that linen had the highest base price, or jewelry in particular has the highest base price when you consider the transport cost. And so having and choosing a comparative advantage in that, in terms of unlocking the workshop and going for various modifiers, is something you could do in order to do that. And then also we talked about pushing the scriptorium, so getting a better scriptorium building that employs more pops is also something to consider from the perspective of emphasizing that thing, specializing in that thing, and then trading with other people, exporting the stuff, and then importing other various things you might want to have. In particular, Korea, I don't think we pan over it at any point during the video, but we have a plus 20% gun output modifier, so we would want to specialize it in and export guns, which incidentally makes fighting other people a little bit easier. So that's something that you could look to specialize in for strategic reasons, because if all your gun supply of everyone around you is coming from you, and then you start fighting them, that kills the trades, and now they don't have guns, and they don't have the ability to upkeep their armies. And so I think that this would have been a really strong gameplay pattern if we had gotten way deeper into the run with Korea, is we would have forced built more guns than we should have, we would have forced exported more guns than we should have, just in terms of making money, and as a consequence, I think we would have gotten easier wars, so we would have gotten a trade-off for our concession. But also, this still ties in with the tech tree, kind of thinking about what we're thinking with, we have 6 branches, we have to choose what we specialize in. If we have a country bonus towards guns, now we are probably committed towards getting the branches of the tech tree that give the gun workshops, mills, and manufactories, or the 4 tiers of buildings that give you better PMs. And so this informs what our tech tree is going to end up looking like. So it informs to some extent our advantages and disadvantages, much how the fact that we're a peninsula kind of necessitates we go into having a dock and a bark and this type of thing. All in one tech tree, like administrative or diplo. For example, the military tree. There's the guns workshop. The gun workshop here in exactly what we're talking about. We discover the new world. not trying to cover war here, but Ming coalition CBs us, but they're going to have a real hard time landing us, and they just brief story time in terms of what was going on is we were trying to fight Ming and Yuan, whichever was stronger, and the reason why is we wanted the Red Turban Rebellion to continue, because as long as there are two of them, that is better for us than one unified thing that we can't fight. In particular, Ming in the south was way stronger, but they had no land border to us. Yuan in the north, we could fight 1v1, and we were trying to also juggle truces so that we had a truce with both simultaneously, because both joined a coalition against us, and if both decked us, we 100% would have died. But you saw there, we just killed a bunch of boats from Ming, and we were using our navy to defend ourselves, of which we had a lot because we made this investment in navies. So you can see how the advantages and needs that have been informed by our geographical start are also informing the way we are going to conduct war, but also in the future, we're conducting war by exporting guns and dumping guns to other people's economies, so they hopefully underproduce guns or can't produce them profitably, so they don't have the industry, so that we can economically destroy them later, and that our strategy, insofar as we have a strategy for war that deviates from the norm, because whatever's normal is also probably good, it's informed by these conditions that we have that are unique to our situation here in Korea. The only thing they can take is this peninsula, because good luck at getting access through Great Yuan. We spam Confucian academies in most places. Going to be nice for that pop promotion. Again, pop promotion speed. So now we have 30 flat, really strong as a modifier. Promotion speed, and it also gives burger literacy, which is quite strong. I think this is our second favorite literacy behind peasants. Also getting max literacy for burgers, which will help less confident and development. Alright, let's talk about something a little bit more complicated. We have this gold here. It has roughly the same amount of supply and demand. However, the gold price is at minus 33%. That is because effective supply and effective demand has an equation that I have been working on with some people in the Discord, and I mean in that they've been trying to figure it out, and I've been trying to help them out, but it's mostly them. I don't know exactly how effective supply and demand are calculated, but it is weighted towards the market. This has downstream effects, of which I'm not sure. Other than if you have extra gold in your market, that is to say, if you produce 100 gold and you consume 20 gold and you export 80, what will happen is your gold price will be lower. What this means is the margin between your trade values is higher because you've pushed down the price of gold because you have an extra supply of it locally in your market, and whoever you're trading to probably has the reverse effect where they have extra demand than they have production, so your margins are going to be fatter in particular. This is one of the reasons why trade is so valuable and so incredibly strong, is because of the weighting of effective supply and demand. If you're coming over from Victoria 3, this is really strong. It's almost like a negative tariff, or the effect you'd have in a negative tariff, which it blows up the root size and the root value. As effective supply and effective demand give extra weight towards the supply and the demand that are happening in the market, and discount the stuff that's happening from trade. Since most of our demand is exports, we are getting effectively more supply than demand, which is decreasing the price here. The play pattern of exporting in order to increase price to make your local industries more profitable. This, on the other hand, relative to a Victoria 3 paradigm, is significantly nerfed because it's the inverse of this effect. Now, this is actually pretty good for us because we are extracting most of our value through trade, so a lower gold price means that each trade is going to be more valuable because we get the differential between the two. However, if we increase the price of gold, it's not the case that the money is lost. The gold is still being sold locally and adding to the local tax base, and so instead we could extract it through the estates, and the estates can get some money to spend, which is all well and fine for us. So this is a reverse of the phenomena we've already covered kind of twice in our really scuffed drawing, which is that we have gold that's maybe up here, and when we push the price of gold back down and make it less profitable, what ends up happening is we increase the value of our trade. So we're not really losing value as long as we have kind of the potential to be trading into more and more markets. But it's also one of the values of trade is gated by what markets you have access to. If we only have access to someone whose gold price is this, then that means that regardless of how we shift our production value or our trade value, regardless of what's where, we have less to extract. And so having more people to trade with critically important in this game because it allows you more opportunities to have the value that you can push. Although as you start to get later and later, I think that this is kind of what it looks like more in terms of the value, where you're getting less of trade as the game goes on. But I'm really not sure about that trend. This is going to be the case that getting a higher gold price is going to get better as the car gets louder outside. That's true. But it's also going to get better as you start to get more control over areas, which we are experiencing, because control decreases tax base, but it does not decrease the value you get from trade, unlike market access, which decreases both. To use our drawing, the point here we're making is this segment of what we're earning is negatively affected by control. This segment is not. So as we get more control, having a larger and larger segment that is in the tax base becomes relatively better than it was before. And so we're entering a phase where spiking the price of gold higher isn't going to really have that much negative value for us. At the same increases time, the tax base. We are also entering a phase where wood is expensive, expanding the gold is expensive, and we can't expand the gold anymore. Which brings us to jewelry. We've capped out the buildings. Now, jewelry costs gold to make. So if we produce jewelry, what will end up happening is, beyond just their PM being valuable in itself, what will happen is we will decrease the price of jewelry and we will increase the price of gold, which will be good if we want to export jewelry just as much as gold. Well, jewelry has a base price of 5, gold has a base price of 10, but jewelry costs half as much to transport, so it's a bit of a wash in terms of which one you want to send out. And so then the question is do we want to just turn gold into jewelry? This isn't something we talk about much in here, but generally speaking, moving a good up a chain in a PM, if each link in that chain is adding value, you're generally going to want to do it. Because if the gold, the PM on the gold building, or the jewelry building rather, if that has positive value, you do want to move it up the chain as much as you can, but it's unclear. We are getting better value through trade right now because we don't have control everywhere. And so there's multiple effects that I don't really know the answers to, but this is kind of our working theory that pushing jewelry in terms of our production strategy, in terms of what we build, seemed like a good idea here. And the answer is, even if the margin by which the jeweler is just as profitable as another building, like let's say a tool maker, the value we get from pushing up the price of gold, since its base values are higher, is going to be larger than, in terms of stimulating our market and adding to the tax base, is going to be larger than other goods, say the toolmaker, in terms of their inputs, if the total value of their inputs is going to be lower. So iron has a base price of 3. In terms of the tools, we see that 0.8 iron is used, so a total of 2.4 worth of value gets stimulated when we create the... Just to clarify, what's going on when we talk about stimulation is now in the Inju market, we have more buy orders for iron. This increases the price of iron, and the increased price of iron increases the tax base. In particular, iron, I think, and I think some other resources, these have extra weight. Here, let's double check in our Hide Your Kids. And with this, if we look at the goods, and the goods that in particular have a high transport cost, and we sort by Z to A, right? And we have the transport cost, we see that iron has a heavier transport cost. This means we can expect this to not get traded as much, and if it's not getting traded as much, a low value on the iron just means a low tax base, and we're not going to be able to re-inject the value through trade. So on iron specifically, and this is probably going to be the case, or an emergent pattern, that anything with a high transport cost on these things specifically, pushing up the price is probably going to be better, because you are probably, in terms of trade, locked out from this upper rung value that you can extract here, because they don't trade as effectively, which means that you get value from the tax base, which means that prices are higher, which is an interesting distinction, that some goods are better to push up the price based on the transport cost of the thing. Also, I think you want local iron production, because if you go to war, and you can't build your weapons and this type of thing, I think that that's bad, but we haven't really noticed a complete inability to build weapons in anyone's kind of start. Those extra buy orders within our own market in terms of adding to the tax base. If we look at the jeweler, base price of 10, we're going to see gold is going to add 4 worth of stimulation to our tax base when we increase the price of it. Beyond that, we also have the additional enhancements we can add on. And So the main point here is that the effect of pushing up price and the way that this increases the tax base, we are getting more of that effect with the gold. And this is making industries more profitable. Simultaneously, we are not making a concession, kind of coming back into here. We are not making a concession sacrificing this type of value up here, because while we are sacrificing it to on the gold, where we're pushing up the tax base portion, we are getting a bigger portion on the trade in the jewelry as a result of our strategy here. And so we can produce more value for our tax base, even if the building is just as profitable as other buildings, and we can also extract just as much through trade because we can trade jewelry just as effectively as gold. And at the same time, I'm pretty sure this has negative effects for other countries, because by decreasing the gold supply, we deny them profitable opportunities to turn gold into jewelry themselves and try and export it. In particular, currently you can't deny exports. Actually, I think you can on gold and silver specifically. I think there's a law that lets you do it on gold and silver specifically. Certainly you can ban the exports of cars. And by banning, since you can't ban exports, what you can do is you can force a bunch of extra jewelers guilds to force up the price to make trades less profitable. But I actually think you can ban the export, and that's maybe what we should have done as Korea to make our jewelers more profitable. So we generate less through trade initially if we ban the export of gold and silver, but we maybe create for ourselves a monopoly and deny other countries, as we're saying here, the opportunity to build profitable jewelers guilds. This, of course, would be great for us because it would give us more opportunities for profitable export, but I'm a little bit less sure about the downstream effects. The entire point of highlighting this isn't to explain our strategy here, but it's to express that there are complex ideas that can be expressed through the economics here in EU5, even though we're just kind of going through a relatively simple plan here of increasing control. Now, I just want to kind of emphasize that most of these effects are created as a result of having a dynamic price system. This is the underlining thing that informs a lot of the complexity and a lot of the things we're trying to touch on, but not get overly bogged down in. Yeah, we will add a bunch more jewelers to the queue, though. So the transportation segment that started at 30, then was 7, is now down to 1.3, so we are able to get quite connected to the capital, to this little peninsula here. In terms of control, we are up to an equilibrium of 82. Now that this is also a core, we can see a lot of these modifiers, of which the big one is the core. We see the town location rank, also a substantive one, to temple one. We see that we would have base 30 even if we had no proximity to the capital. Satisfaction is also pushing up control, but we don't see it in there exactly. Is that providing proximity? I'm pretty sure satisfaction pushes up control. Maybe I'm just confused. Maybe I am just confused. I can't check in game, obviously, right now because I don't have access to it anymore. But this is a thing where if you can core a place, it's a lot more valuable. But very often you're gated by your ability to core stuff based on cabinet actions. This kind of informs a strategy for going more vassal-oriented, because when you integrate your vassals, you will gain integration on those provinces, and if those have an accepted culture or a primary culture, they will get cored. That's the system for coring. You integrate something, and then it needs to be the correct culture as well. It takes a lot of cabinet actions to both get something integrated and then also push your culture in that location. See that it is applying plus 20, and so that can connect pretty well. But it is connecting to a different market, which is kind of another thing to think about. And so the connection to the market is a respectable 75% as well here, and so the economic activity is happening here, we're getting relatively well compensated for. A point I think is worth making is that in the Liaoyang market, we generally had a difficult time collapsing prices, and one of the reasons why, if we zoom out, it'll be easier to see, is we were only roughly 50% of that market, so we really couldn't control the spending habits of the rest of the market. In particular, I think having markets where you have all the control of that market, or you're controlling all the spending in the market, makes things a lot easier for you to get certain sorts of effects, and you may want to make concessions in order to get this type of situation, because what's happening is we're trying to collapse the price of masonry. As we're trying, the AI countries that are in our market are spending more masonry, or are using up that masonry, driving the price back up. And so there's this little interaction where, in particular, situations where you are in you are the only one in your market, this creates more profitable opportunities in a way that is not direct profit, but you instead can expect more EV in the form of greater discounts on buildings on average. And so the economic activity is happening here. We're getting relatively well compensated for. We finally get Yangmingshan in the north here upgrading to a town, which is going to be a critical piece of infrastructure with 100% harbor capacity. We later put a trade center there and created a new market in Yangmingshan, largely because it propagated maritime presence really well. And at the time, we thought we could propagate market access through the maritime kind of things. But even if we can't, you, in theory, would be better connecting the capital eventually because the greater harbor capacity. And so this allowed us to have better prices because Yangmingshan, in terms of its market access, it really doesn't have a lot here. And so we can't really build profitable buildings that well, and we actually do want to get this turning into a city, this type of thing. You can see that we have just enough to upgrade it to a town, and I think we're saying we're currently in the process of upgrading to a town, which is going to be a critical piece of infrastructure with 100% harbor capacity for connecting the rest of the north up here to the rest of our nation for control. I mean, you can't not take Beijing. You can't, So prices update. Gold is up from minus 33% to minus 23%, and jewelry, we have to scroll all the way to the top here of the very lowest low, is down from minus 29% to minus 40%. If we look at the way that this affects the trade routes, which to be fair, we have a confounding variable. Notice we have locked in trade routes, some that might be interesting. We have exporting glass to Hala. That's because Hala is not able to produce glass themselves, and we need it to upgrade buildings. And so we are forcing a supply into a market that doesn't have very good access. We are also forcing slaves, well, I mean, that's all you do to them, to go up to the north, and so that we can work the RGOs in that area, and then we're sending masonry for the same reason, so we can upgrade stuff to towns. Yangmingshan required us exporting both the masonry and the glass in order to get going on that. We added way more trade routes. We have way less gold at the top of the scrum here, so we're not exporting gold to other people, so they are not able to do as many of the PMs that require gold, and we are starting to export quite a bit of jewelry in here. We have 115 total sell orders of jewelry. About 100 of those are exports, and the rest is our own local consumption. Towards the bottom, we were actually having higher trades profit at the marginal level, at the very least profitable one, which is why we added a whole bunch of trade. So trade overall seems relatively the same in value, a little bit more flat, a little bit less polarized with really high ones and really low ones, but that wasn't the point. We expected this. What the idea is that hopefully we've increased our tax base by a large amount by increasing the price of gold and making it more profitable. Of course, we would need to test a little bit more and look at stuff a little bit more closely to know for sure, but the idea is I think what we expected is being seen right here. There's a lot of moving parts. It's really hard to evaluate that kind of thing, and especially now we can't check this type of thing, but thinking through the logic in the abstract, I do think is useful for trying to understand exactly what type of effects you're going to get and what type of strategies you are going to take as a result of your unique positions. Here we have a bunch of gold and silver, which is why we want to push those things in particular, but also a secondary effect. We're colonizing up in Alaska here. They have a bunch of ivory there, and we will control the market in Alaska because those are our colonies. So in particular, we also have a really good source of an additional add-on for the jewelry. So our jewelry we will have an even further advantage in because we will have that available ivory. So we hit an important inflection point here where we have 100 maritime presence all throughout the bay in here, and our trade ships are starting to propagate control on the east coast of the peninsula. I believe we also had a really big come up in income here because we can run more trade routes because we have that maritime presence. Coming back to the canal we're building, we're not quite done with all the levels here, but it's looking like some of the segments are going to have a ton to overcome from the proximity. Remember, some of these sea zones we're going through are 1 to 2 cost, but this plus 25, since it's additive with discounts and having to incur it on both the forest and the hills, this might be too much to overcome, and we might end up spreading the control not through our canal, but rather through this maritime presence here. We eventually did end up primarily spreading it, except for the places that were directly connected to the canal through the maritime presence later on in the run. So we have a rural cathedral, much like a temple, which increases max control. It, however, can only be applied to rural areas, so no towns or cities, and we put a bunch down in areas that we know we want to keep rural. And so this is an interesting kind of play pattern, where a lot of the places we want to keep rural are going to be the ones with really good resources, like the pepper and the gold, and also places that have bad terrain, like the mountains here. Another interesting building like this is the Market Village. It can only be built in rural areas. You see the requirement here. And this is a Swiss Army knife of buildings. It gives you plausible laborers, which smooths out resource expansions, which need laborers. That way there's going to be 100 ready and willing. It gives you some trade advantage and capacity. And also, it gives you a bunch of different production methods that produce a bunch of different stuff. Pottery, jewelry, weaponry, beer, glass, and tools. And so in particular, for a lot of different countries that don't get very good access to gold and silver, I think this is going to be an important building for gaining access to the jewelry. In particular, marketplaces use jewelry. It is a very important input, and so even if your pops are eating jewelry and you don't want to give them jewelry, the fact that in order to get your marketplaces to run, you need it, it's going to be important. And also, this is going to be a reasonable building for pushing masonry a little bit, and the possible laborers is kind of a modifier we like quite a bit, just generally speaking. So they're very modular, and we have these again in all the areas where mountains and good resources that we want to have not expanding as a result of, generally speaking, good resources. We see gold and pepper here are among them. We get our first core across the bay in Weihai, and it's going to have a maximum of 100 controls. So this area, this little peninsula across the bay, 100 control on that. So up in the north, we're starting to get a little bit of a colony situation. However, they functionally have zero access to the market down here in Akita, so I think we're going to make our own. So, just wanted to comment a little bit on the colonization. One of the reasons we're colonizing so much is because there is an abundance of money generally in the economy. Economies are really fast right now. And colonization, extra colonies, increase the cost of all the colonies, so you can really only colonize so much, generally speaking. But we can super push it because we have tons of money. I anticipate you won't have as much money on release builds, and colonizing as much won't be very good. Up here, a lot of ivory, all Arctic, terrible land, this type of thing. Our colonization kind of got stopped here in Alaska and couldn't really continue for like the next 80 years as a result of there being a market in Alaska here where we needed to set out our exploration from, and that market was it didn't have the goods that we needed for our exploration in it, and this really gummed us up. But we did start eventually getting ivory from here and importing it down to our kind of main market right here, because this place has a pretty good harbor suitability. Incidentally, we don't have control over this market here. We do not have control over this market, so Japan gets to choose, in effect, where the ivory goes. By founding this market here, as an example, on the ivory specifically, we will now have the trade advantage in that market, and so we will get to control the first routes, or the routes first, and so we can ship the ivory down. So, in addition to gaining extra market access, gaining control over the ivory is an example of a reason why we might want to create a market up here. And this will also give us a little bit of leverage over the area. The area is in the Arctic in terms of the terrain, so it's really not going to be worth a lot at any point in time, but we're going to make a new market there. Okay, I mean, it's not much with a market value of 2, but I don't know how that gets calculated. I think that's maybe based on the tax base. We're certainly producing more than 2 gold worth of goods, but in terms of lack of market access, lack of employment, this type of stuff, this might be what our tax base currently is. Also, you see an abundance of slaves in the market and jewelry. We're exporting to there, and it is propping up our economy to some extent. Also silver, which is a little bit, I think silver is being produced up there as well. It'll grow. So unfortunately, the last 2 segments of our canal, Hoiyang and Tongxian, are not the most efficient ways to travel, despite, those having a canal system. Just traveling with one through this mountain is a little bit more efficient. So, a little bit unfortunate, but we still do have... This really surprised me. I was not expecting this to be the case. The canal system out to here, which is helping us get over to here a bit faster. This is probably the last major improvement we will be able to make to proximity, other than these on the coast here should get more proximity as a result of going through the ocean. And if that ends up being quite a lot, I don't think we show what we get by the end of the age, but it ends up being as green as it is up here. It ends up being on the coast down here, which is pretty strong. But remember, we had to use one of, if we're thinking of a resource and your ability to get advances as a resource, we used one of our deep path advanced routes. If we think of it as we get 2 deep paths, 1 to 2 medium and 1 to 2 small, we used one of our deep paths on this, and so we have made a concession. It's unlikely we're going to have, for example, the strongest military alongside this, although we could go for military and that specifically if we wanted to, but instead we're leaning on our navy because we have an advantage on navy to protect us militarily. If we use the proximity map mode, you can see how they are traveling around in order to get there, even if they're on the full right side, and so we're expecting to see more of that, and this is kind of the last vestige of a place that's not traveling through there. It's interesting to see how they do use the canal system a little bit. I'm pretty sure we can put a canal system through here in the middle, so we should have snaked one like at least halfway down to the southeast, I think, in terms of like maximizing profit. Get a little bit more access here. I don't know if we have a river through here, but this is kind of, yeah, the control you can see is pretty bad there, and especially it's bad in places that are non-coastal, and so we probably should have tried to address that a little bit better. The level to which we've been able to propagate control, at least for this age, until we get new technologies that are going to make it better, and then we can start looking more outward. You can see here our colonies in Hokkaido, Taiwan, and also in the Philippines. Again, able to do quite a lot of colonization. Not really emphasize it. These places don't have a lot of population. By the end of the age, in 20-ish years, they don't really have big enough populations to form towns, but eventually they get going, and we have settlements in them, which again give enormous population growth rates, and so eventually those will be pretty useful territories. They have some decent resources, and they also, you can only propagate maritime presence where you kind of have coastal access. They are also giving us our kind of unbroken chain that we are looking for along this route of places where we can go with maritime access. We took Hangzhou, I don't think you could take it, or I don't think you could see this, which was a market capital. I think taking market capitals is a really strong gameplay pattern, and so we do have kind of this nice zone in these kind of areas, which incidentally are inland seas. Which we've already been doing, galleys. But we just haven't been commenting on it too much. If we kind of look through here, we can see that we do have a nice string of area that we will have maritime presence through at some point in time, and really be able to dominate trade there. And this sort of brings... This I wanted to comment on was what we were talking about a little bit earlier in terms of our values. You can see all of our values off to the left. What is going on is, as long as we are moving in a particular direction, you can see centralization, we have a ton, you don't decay back. So we don't decay back to 23, even though this is the value we trend towards. So getting to trending towards just 0.01 in the direction you want is a really important threshold, and for values specifically, thresholds are important, rather than getting a huge trend in that direction, which gives you a lot more flexibility in terms of giving out privileges, because you don't mind sinking some of your values as long as you are just across that threshold, and that is one of the kind of main things you have to play with here. You can see here we're trending towards innovative, which we wanted to do, and relying on events to push it, or we will trend towards 27. I think we have a cabinet action on this, and this is why we're pushing in this direction. We don't have a cabinet action on centralization. As we mentioned, we are using the road system in order to push that, or the road event in the parliament, and that is why we have such high centralization. We have also made a concession here in order to generate a lot of control. A lot of people have shown runs where a lot of conquest is happening. They are getting that conquest through a CB, they are getting through parliament. We have chosen to take this thing where we have to pass the promote gravel roads in order to get this centralization. So we have gotten less CBs in order to have this situation where we have a bunch of control. I think that this is probably worth it, but this is a concession that we are making for this particular thing in order to have pushed the control up in this direction. And so We do have a lot of trending towards some things like free subjects. I think a lot of the really good trending things are just a little bit too cheap. Navy is also a really important one for us to give us extra maritime presence. But again, you can see here, it's 0.04. It doesn't need to be a big number. You just need to get going in one direction and then use events to push it up all the way. So the natural trend, if it were on land, would be just to 4 naval, but is through events we have pushed it up the rest of the way. I wish I had an event to show you, but I don't have a screenshot of the events, and so this is going to be the thing. Brings us to a larger point I wanted to make about EU5 economics, which is that I think it's phasic in nature. What is really important changes over the course of time. You know, for us at this outside here, expanding our RGOs all the way, getting control as much as possible, which again, we have made a ton of different concessions, or we've given up opportunity costs in a lot of places to really push and emphasize this control. Even releasing subjects so that they can have a bit of control for you. You can see up here, we have chosen to keep Beijing. There's a unique building there that gives us local control, but also by owning Beijing, we get a ton of trade advantage because there are unique buildings you put, or sorry, not unique, buildings that have to be put in the market center that are placed there that give us a lot of trade routes and trade advantage. I do think taking these specifically is really, really powerful play pattern. We might show Hangzhou. And then also urbanizing as much as possible so that I think you can see down here, we also have this as a trade center, and this is the only location we own, and we have 2 subjects here as well. You have these urban buildings to be able to keep stuff queued up in. All of this is really important. But what's important changes over time, and in particular, the discovery of the New World provides one of the best examples of what I mean by this, is when you discover the New World, you get a whole bunch of new goods, and the first time your pops taste these goods, then this creates demand for the goods. To give a bit of an example, because we didn't have time to give an example, tobacco, you discover tobacco, you ship it back to Sevilla, back to Portugal. Tobacco immediately goes to plus 300 price because they are consuming the good. So even though tobacco has a really low base price, it's now got an actual price in Sevilla of 6, let's say, because it's plus 300, base price of 2, and then where it's being produced in the Americas, it has an absolute just collapsed price of 1, so you can get a really nice juicy trade route, but a concession has to be made in order to do stuff like developing colonies and getting a trade advantage in colonies. You have to kind of make a choice about how you're going to look, so which we're going to talk about. Extremely expensive. So that means if you can trade for them, or move the trade, or control the trade for them, it's immensely profitable. So now you send your traders out, and you look to get what's called trade power in the region. And advantage. I do believe we have a kind of contested region in. We have one location in Hangzhou, and we have the most trade advantage here. We have one location, and with that, we have secured the ability to trade first. Hangzhou, if we take a look at the, also with maritime presence, trade power here, and we can see that we have 115 trade power, and they have 111. Whoever has the biggest trade advantage, rather than power, these are the ones who control all the trades first. So they resolve all their trades, prices are recalculated, and then the next person goes. And so if you can be first in these really lucrative trade opportunities, then this becomes extremely important. And so gaining trade advantage through bullying people, colonizing, and using maritime presence, this is something you can do. And to kind of try and illustrate this a little bit better, we've looked over that one repeatedly, but let's say we have a production of something, although in this case, Hangzhou, we don't actually own the production in Hangzhou, but let's say we're producing in Hangzhou, right? And we have this base price. If we have a trade advantage, we can expect big money, honey. Right? We love those. Those are dollar bills. Those are Benjamins. Those are buckets of ducats, right? We can get a ton of value via trade, which is what we've discussed. Whoever has the trade advantage gets to grab these first trades. Now, when you are your own market, you control most of the market. For our trades in Inju, we are getting to control these. However, if we didn't have the control of the trade, China would resolve all the good trades in this segment in Hangzhou, and we instead would trade for like this value. So now we are going to get the smaller value share as a result of not having trade advantage. This is a really powerful way of extracting value, and in terms of a simulation, I really like this for simulating the extracted or the extractive nature of colonialism. But in this way, you get to get all of this value here if you have the trade advantage. And if you make more traders, if you expand the amount of traders that you're producing there, eventually you completely saturate the trade and no trades are profitable. So let's say China owns Hangzhou, right? Or we manage to, let's say China owns Hangzhou. They trade a little bit more. They're going to deny more profitable trades to us. Right? They're going to chew into the value that is getting produced. So even though we think of it in terms of this way where we're getting value in two ends and we're guaranteed value, we're not guaranteed value if we lose trade advantage in key areas. And you won't lose trade advantage in your homeland where you have a ton of like locations, but if you get this eaten into overseas, or you eat into it overseas, you can deny or gain a whole bunch of value. Just trying to illustrate this point. I hope it makes sense, but it's difficult to kind of express just how powerful the trade advantage is. And coming back into looking at this, we only have 14 trade capacity here. So it's not like we get to run a bunch of routes. Ming has 95. That's going to be, of the routes in here, so many of the really best juicy routes that Hangzhou can run, specifically for goods that originate in Hangzhou. So this includes shipping stuff back to Inju. We get to go first in Hangzhou, shipping stuff back to Inju as well, or even from Inju, shipping things from Hangzhou. So with our Inju trade power, we can import, or a trade capacity. So even though we only have 15, this unlocks our ability in Inju, where we have like 250 trade capacity. This unlocks our ability to extract from Hangzhou. And we can even extract an arbitrage as well. I haven't confirmed this with an observation effect, but in theory, this is how it works, where if there's really good, let's say there's spices in Hangzhou, we import to Inju, and we hoover out all the spices that are possibly possible to export, because you cannot export to the extent that supply is now lower than demand. There's a cap on how much you can export. We hoover all the spices out of Hangzhou. Then from Inju, we have really cheap spices, we export them. Arbitrage is possible, so even if you have one market center, if you have an advantage in a whole bunch of stuff and a bunch of trade capacity in that origin one, you're still going to get to extract all the value. And so this is really, really key. We don't need the trade routes here or the trade capacity here locally in Hangzhou in order to hoover all the value out of here. We just need the trade advantage. As far as I understand the mechanics, this isn't something I have evaluated and feel really strongly about with a great degree of veracity, but as far as I understand it, this is the way the mechanism works, and this is a really good way of kind of simulating the extracted nature of like colonialism, because what Portugal would do is they'd set up one trade shop, they'd get the trade advantage, and then they would hoover up all of the value out of Benin. And so now Benin gets none of the value of the production that's occurring there, just the inky-dinky, this, which is, of course, the tax base. And so this is, there's a lot of depth to specifically going and playing for trade advantage. I think that a lot of people on a surface level might not fully appreciate how much just getting a trade advantage just really lets you get the value out of a place, like a lot, because you cut off its ability to extract value through trade, because you seize that, you take it. This changes in terms of what's important. However, this isn't the only way you can play it. Here's the flip side, because in order to go the colonization route, we have to play Age of Discovery in the Diplo tree, and so you have to make a concession here. And notice, you're not getting military tech here. You're getting like naval range, you're getting food production, you're getting Diplo range, you're getting colonial range, you're getting naval-oriented stuff, you're getting like, we have some prestige advances, maritime trade advantage. Incidentally, that's something we really, really want, but we are getting a whole bunch of stuff that is not, also iron output plus 50%. It really doesn't have a whole lot of manufactories in it. In order to get manufactories in this next stage coming in, we have to play the administrative. Now here's the thing. trade advantage is winner takes all. If you can't be a winner, then you probably want to do something else. But if you can control your own local market, if you're the only one in there, then you will have the trade advantage, so you can control trades for goods originating from your market because you have trade advantage there. And so what you can do is you can push trying to build a place tall and trying to build a more inward facing place where, let's say, we specialize in paper. We collapse the price of paper. We can now, since we have the trade advantage in our location, ship the paper, and we end up getting a lot of productivity both out of the tax base as well as off of the trades of exporting our goods. And we get more value off the tax base because we get stuff like paved roads. So we get better market access, and so we don't lose value to the lack of market access. We don't lose value to the lack of control. And so if we want to get this colonial extracted method, we have to sacrifice quite a big portion of the tree. And if we want to go for this thing where we're getting this manufacturing bonuses, we have to sacrifice a big chunk of the tree. If we do that both, we can't go military, right? And so you have to decide which advantage makes sense. Thinking of something like Brandenburg, right? Something like Brandenburg comes to mind where I'm not going to be able to trade overseas in like Benin and get a really strong trade advantage. And okay, I can conquer people's market capitals, this stuff. I can force people through war to move their market capital to my locations, this type of stuff. But I really don't think I'm going to be able to extract a lot of money from acquiring trade advantage overseas, shipping stuff back to Brandenburg. So instead, I hunker down, I get military tech so I can dominate militarily, and I also get these types of techs so I can build an internal economy, and incidentally, with the paved roads, move my army around faster. And we get this also weapon workshop there. Ayo, let's go. And so we are getting, although there's trade advantage right here in terms of the trade, but there's no trade range in this location, which is kind of interesting. So if you're fighting someone else, if you're in the HRE and there's two big powers in the market, I guess this will let you get control of the market to some extent. But the idea is that we talk about trade advantage being really powerful. What you focus on in the economies, again, can shift. We're trying to go through area pretty deep. Notably, there's paved roads, and so if you wanted to place something more centralized and internal, you could do that. And we have these manufactories here for paper. These are workshops. There are things that are actually called manufactories. I need to be more precise. These workshops, paper workshops, naval supplies workshop, weapon. Now here's an interesting one. Carrick is here. So now we are seeing a huge kind of little bit of a bind, which if we are going to fight overseas in navally, we want carracks, right? And we also want all the stuff for colonizing. Now you are locked in on a sort of double big concession. You're going to have to sink having a good land army. If you want to play Castile, you want to fight over the New World, you want to have carracks, and you want to be able to colonize and go after the New World. Now you're not going to be able to hit the bottom of the tree that easily in the military section, and so someone like France is going to be someone that is maybe problematic, and they're not because AI is weak, but if AI were strong, then they would be a little bit of a problem, in theory. Also, that's kind of a nice tech that we have there. Infantry power. That's unique to Korea. I didn't even notice that from workshops, these types of things. And okay, you could do both, but remember you can only research 50 to 75% of all text cost within a given period of time, so then you'll really be dumping military. So the idea of going shallow in the military, we talked about this a little bit with Milan. The early arbiquests, this is what we meant by going shallow. So we got this in order to have a decent military PM. Actually, in our Milan run, we went for training fields, which it can only be built in rural areas. Not a very good source of manpower, but we had to go 5 techs, low investment. We got kind of okay military in the Age of Discovery, and I think it's Age of Renaissance. We didn't go for the building that gives you manpower. I think that was a mistake, but this allowed us to really get a lot of trade, a lot of both diplo and administrative tech. Incidentally, as Milan, we were colonizing the New World. We were very, very strong there. So you have to make choices about what's going to be important and then play to your strengths in that way, and the economies will change based on how you make your choices. Here's our literacy map mode. We are going to go through a lot of map modes. I'm going to try and pause correctly on each of these map modes. Here's our development map mode, with our best province being set. You guys notice there the lag, and you also might notice we were basically paused for the entirety of our video. Generally speaking, as performance got a little bit deeper, it got a little bit choppy, but it's also an early access build, and we only have 24 gigs of RAM. I think you're probably going to want more. 71. In terms of income, we are making around 600 in taxes and 1,000 in trade. Important one to note, the Jugen taxes, or Jungen taxes, 240, our marginal kind of value we are getting from trade is around 1,000, with only 20% crown power. With the nerf, we're expecting this to go down to around 200, and the other 800 goes to the estates, who incidentally are going to build a bunch of stuff. But if we think about that, then the various things we talked about, where we could effectively double the tax that goes towards our burghers, which for us are Jungen, this represents a really, really big increase in our income, right? Like plus 20 or 30% for 5 years. And so when we talk about opportunity cost as well, for our parliament, when we get a CB, we're giving up that 30% higher income as well in terms of opportunity cost. We also sunk it a lot for centralization to try and make this video to try and maximize control. Less our trade expense. The reason our economy is doing booty is because we misclicked an event and accidentally took a $56,000 loan. Now, towards the beginning of the video, we took a look at the tooling workshop in Jinju, notably suffering from market access. It was around 0.53%, let's call it 0.5, and then also it only had about 20 control. Now it has 58% control. So in terms of how many goods it was producing, it went from producing around half the goods it can because of market access to 65%, which represents roughly a 30% increase, or a 25% because it was 53%. And in terms of tax base that it was added to, we have to multiply it by the level of control, and so 0.5 times 0.2 is around 10% of the values going to the tax base, and now we can round a little and call it 0.6 times 0.6, and so roughly 36% is going to the tax base, which represents a 260% increase in terms of tax base, which is kind of the overall trajectory that we experienced. So that's kind of summarizing what the effects are on an outskirt province that really didn't have very good opportunities for profitable buildings, what we got for going after the control and the market access both. I think we actually should have more market access. Again, we've mentioned it multiple times regarding propagating a market access through Maritime. During this time frame, as it relates to kind of this location that is out here on the edge, of course, we acquired max control much earlier in this central area where we started urbanizing and producing first, with a ton of concessions, I want to emphasize. Well, that's it. I was trying to be as information dense as possible. Hopefully I succeeded, while focusing on specifically economics and specifically control.
Definitely more dense.
Which I think is a pretty sharp deviation from EU4 in EU5, and so I wanted to talk about that, constraints being, of course, time. I'll probably have to go back and re-record my rather lengthy intro. The intro that is at the start of this is under 9 seconds. And that's because I wanted to give enough time for you guys to be able to pause with the map modes at the end that I had already recorded. But I did want to comment on a couple things before I went. The first of all is I'm probably going to be doing more EU5 content. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them down in the comments. And if there's enough questions, we will do a Q&A
We're still
video.
planning on doing
And
Q&A.
then secondly, I just wanted to comment on the price collapsing kind of metagame / mechanic. And I have mixed feelings on this. I think it's fine from a gameplay perspective. Yep. But from the perspective of a simulation, the government locking in super low prices for like 30 things all at once, I think doesn't quite make sense, but I don't really see a good solution for it. This is something... So, I think it doesn't make sense, and what it is it's really, really powerful. So this dilutes out the power of the interesting and subtle connections of you have like these emergent effects and these cascading effects and like this type of thing, and it really dilutes it out if you just have like a minus 66% price. But I don't really know what the solution is, because the most straightforward solution that you could have is charge for the price of the goods over time. So as the building is constructing, for however long it's constructing, you pay the goods. However, I think this is really hostile to a new player. I think if you look at your gold and you're like, hey, I could afford this, and it tells you per week it's going to cost you 2, and you just queue up a bunch of buildings and you're like, okay, I have 200 gold income, I could build 100 or whatever, make the numbers make sense. And then after you do that, suddenly you're paying 4 a week because you doubled the price of the good because you introduced a whole bunch of demand. I think that is from a game design perspective, I think that's bad because it's super hostile to a new player. It's maybe you do a setting where you pay up front and then it instantly changes the price, but that's like you want to have price equilibriums, and this is part of the thing that is wanted here. And so I don't know exactly what the solution is here. So I feel some kind of way. I mean, I think that there's probably some solutions that are kind of a little bit fiddly, like I think the best one that I could think of, or someone suggested to me, and I forgot that someone suggested it to me, is that you have a slider or a cap that you choose for buying production goods, and as you can't afford stuff, just production on some buildings shuts down. But then it's starting to look like a build queue a little bit, but maybe that's okay. But that would be one way of managing the price of those things. Is having a slider, and you can just slide it down if things are too bad, and a notification bell comes up on top. Let's say if the overall base price or the overall price of construction goods that are being used currently in the economy are above a certain percent, you get an alert where it's like, hey, maybe you want to tone the slider down, construct slower, and save on government buildings. Maybe that's a solution, but let's continue. I think I left feedback on, but I do have like mixed feelings on that. But anyways, I hope mixed feelings, because I mainly don't think that, other than what we just said, there's very satisfying solution, but that actually one seems kind of okay. As long as there's an alert that says, yo dog, stuff's expensive, maybe tone it down. Maybe tone it down a little, eh? You guys enjoyed? If you did, you could consider this the outro portion, but we're going to look at the screenshots. Feel free to do the YouTube algorithm thing, like, comment, subscribe, notification bell, and other than that, have a happy Thursday. So we are going to look through these a little bit. We got some monarchies, country rank in here. Incidentally, there's some powerful bonuses if I recall correctly. Your ability to build stuff overseas in other people's provinces is gated by something power. I forget, power projection, something like this. I believe country rank gives a lot of it. There's some of it in the tech tree, and so your ability to dominate others is going to be something you want to invest in if you're doing that overseas trade kind of exploitation. You can see here, we have a bunch of places integrated, not all places with accepted culture. We did become cultural hegemon later in the run, where we can integrate entire areas, which are effectively like kind of like provinces but much bigger. Just for a frame of reference, this is 2 provinces. I think this is 1 province, and an area would be this entire chunk. And so that was something that we knew was going to be something we were going to go towards, is try and hit cultural hegemon. But most of this is integrated, so we have not blobbed out away from our power base very much at all. And some of the places you can see up here, that's Beijing, that we are owning incidentally, and then we have our subjects, which don't really show up in the map mode, but they would have been on the edge and they would have been unincorporated. Also with your subjects, you can increase your cultural acceptance of their cultures through diplomatic interactions while they're still your subject, and make it easier to have their culture as an accepted culture, which is a play pattern that encourages you to have subjects. You can both encourage the way that they look at you and you look at them, I think, and this can make it so that the cost of accepting a culture in terms of your cultural acceptance capacity is more than cut in half. So this is something we're definitely going to want to do. I think eventually we would want to flip Chinese, just because the sheer number of pops that are over here, and this eventually is kind of, we maybe even want to move the capital over here eventually, just like super long term in terms of thinking about this Korea run. I love this soundtrack, by the way. Here you can see our tax base. This is modified by control and market access. And you can see it's really kind of hot, specifically around the capital. And this is also where we tried to put a lot of stuff as well. Proximity, I think this is a key point. Based on the proximity map mode, we really should have a lot of market access down here, but we kind of don't. But that's because the naval infrastructure. Roads here, we probably underbuilt roads a little bit, but something is roads cost sand, and we were maybe not as active, or we probably didn't collapse sand as well as we should have throughout the run. Market language, There are bonuses for each different language type. There are downstream effects. I don't remember all of them, but there is a lot of depth to that system. I don't really know all the ways to change language. There's our population map mode, which is maybe something worth thinking about. And here's the canal system that we dug out and the migration that we had forced there. So it's an interesting like line that we have forced. An enormous chunk of our population, though, is here in China. Culture, you could see, well, the culture map mode, you could see that was almost an exact kind of overlap of what our cores map mode looked like. Or, I mean, it should be. We accept Korea. We didn't accept Jurchen. We didn't want to accept Jurchen. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, because these are the pops we were making slaves from, and if we accept them, then we can't have them as slaves. However, there's an interesting gameplay pattern, which I think is an exploit, which is we could take them off accepted, or we can make them accepted, which releases all the slaves automatically, and then take them off of accepted, and we could do this anytime we want to release slaves. If we wanted to. Dominant language is an interesting one as well. I don't really know how dominant language affects things, other than maybe it affects satisfaction. People prefer the language being dominant. Language power, I think, has cultural effects. You see, Mandarin is quite powerful, more powerful than Mongolian, but Mongolian is the Yuan thing. Of a particular note is the liturgical language, and so I think we're coming up on that. Liturgical language is the huge driving force between your ability to research, and this is the mechanic through which the West researches faster than everyone else. And it is, if I recall correctly, based on the number of clerical guys you have. So in theory, you could make that big push towards clerical guys and really try and make your liturgical language really really strong. And maybe this is something to do as China specifically, where you have this huge pop. You own a large chunk of your liturgical language. I don't know if you can swap your liturgical language, but... Works of art is kind of an interesting thing. We had a huge portion of them in the capital. This gives us cultural tradition. Cultural tradition helps us to integrate pops faster for pop conversion. I think it also might help us to integrate subjects faster. I'm not 100% sure. It also, the art is helping with some of this other stuff, pop promotion speed, but that's a relatively small modifier for pop promotion speed. There are a lot of other bigger modifiers that we can get for that. I think stab gives a lot of pop promotion speed as well. We didn't hover it once in this video. I think it gives up to plus 50% at 100 stab, so that's another good one. Institutions, in the version we received, seemed like they spread pretty indiscriminately. I think that institutions should probably be gated more in Europe. I think I'm one of the only guys who played outside of Europe in terms of making a video. I found it strange that institutions were all over the place. I think we had printing press even spawn in our nation here as Korea. I don't know if this is something that they're going to change, and they just... I mean, as far as a test build, I would rather have the institutions everywhere, but I thought it was strange that the institutions were everywhere. But we didn't have a problem spreading it, especially because we have all this roads and infrastructure. We would actually get institutions very quickly. Infrastructure is a huge driver of your ability to get institutions. And if you stay lean, you can accept them faster as well. There is the area map mode. I think that's worth kind of showing off. This is where we could, with the hegemon, integrate, culture convert this. I think with the military hegemon, you can integrate areas, and also a tech you get in like the Age of Revolutions or the Age of Absolutism, a later tech that you get, you can now integrate areas. And so this is one of the ways in which you speed up your ability to expand in this type of thing as the game goes on, as you get later and later into the thing. Notice quite a lot of areas and also cultures in Japan if you were kind of paying attention to it. Region, bigger kind of sort of thing. Yeah, we were... Great Yuan and Great Ming really, really hated us. Great Ming actually also imploded. I forget exactly... They got full annexed. I don't know if they got full... I think got like full annexed by like an event or something, which is really weird, and then they were friendly with us again. And you can see here all of our subjects. We had like the entire north subjugated, but couldn't put our control up there. And also, to the extent that you extract value like through this segment, the upper segment that is through trade, it doesn't matter if they're our subject is not or not. As long as we have the trade advantage in the location, we get the value. And so we were getting the value from a lot of their stuff anyways, so there's no need to really own the territory. I think that owning territory is a little bit baity. Antagonism map mode. I think that the AI could maybe be a little bit more aggressive on the antagonism front. I thought it was strange that Japan basically developed zero antagonism. I don't know if the numbers are exactly what I like. I think that whatever the numbers that are developed as a result of neighboring wars should probably be a little bit higher. Right now, they really only care if you're going after their religion or their culture, relative to it's close by and you're going for stuff. So I do think you should probably generate a little bit more antagonism. I think, did we show that we were great hegemon? One sec. Apologies. So, nope, just that we're #1 great power. We are going to be getting great power score from a lot of different locations. Population scaled by control. We don't have a lot of pop, but we have a lot of control. It's interesting to see that that is the #1 driver of our ability to have a great power score. I don't know to what extent playing for the great powers thing is going to be useful. The cabinet action of convert culture of an area is particularly strong. This is something that is like, it's going to take a large sample size to really kind of suss out what's going on. We are also getting a ton from monthly income as well. I wonder if that's entirely tax-based or any type of income. A lot of things go based off the tax base specifically. Winter was a super big factor in terms of our run overall. We had some boats get frozen in the ice a few times, which is an interesting mechanic, but it really slowed down our ability to construct, and was definitely a factor we had to play around. We have a bit of supply. Fortification, this is kind of an interesting one regarding, at least talking about military briefly, because, I mean, I don't talk about military, is that, or not that I don't, we're here to talk about economics, but with the military, we really emphasized having a bunch of forts with the idea that, and this happened a couple times, rather than fighting armies, we generally would park our army behind the fort. And if they want to assault the fort, we go in and we destroy them when they're assaulting the fort because their morale drops to like super low numbers. They can't assault the fort. They have to siege the fort. And there's like, these are mountain forts over here. This is a hill fort. So the die bonuses are particularly bad. The die bonuses are in our spreadsheet as well, but we won't go into them. So what they would have to do is they'd have to push and siege. And what we would do is we would split our army, and we would come behind them, and we would take provinces. And as we take provinces, it cuts their supply line. So now they can't assault because we'll attack them. They don't have any food, so they're going to suffer a ton of attrition. And so there really wasn't a very good way for them to push into us when they were coming in and would have to fight us. We didn't have to fight too much on the back foot at all, but we did have this in place, and we executed it once or twice when Yuan managed to... Yuan really didn't manage to destroy our army. We managed to just, like, ruin our own army by getting the morale to 0 and then getting Fog of War. Not used to playing around Fog of War. And so this happened once or twice, and the army came back. We had other armies. We pulled back, and then we did this kind of defensive paradigm. But this is kind of informed by, again, the advantages that we have here in Korea. It's not the case that we can't fight. It's that we have to fight in a particular way, which is we have a stronger navy. We're on a peninsula. And so what we're going to do is we're going to hunker down and defend. And as you come into the territory, you open yourself to getting the supply line cut. And this is why we built the forts in a lot of ways that we did. And when your supply line's getting cut, you now can't siege. And you can't assault because we may not have had a huge army, but it was big enough that if you're assaulting, you're going to lose the fight. And so I thought that this was kind of an interesting gameplay pattern, and one that we were thinking through as we were playing, as it related to kind of the forts and like the fact that we have entirely mountains and hills up here. Very defensible position to dump military tech in favor of administrative and diplotech, which is what we did as a result of kind of our starting conditions, which are informing what we do. River arrows. This is a moving map. It's very cool looking. It lags a ton in its current iteration. It's almost certainly going to be optimized, but you can see the river arrows showing where the river goes. River propagates better downstream than upstream, and so I do think this is a really cool mechanic, but we didn't show this off earlier, but here's the river arrows thing. It's also really hard to see, so you might need to take a little bit of a close look. So, and then satisfaction. A huge driver of our control levels was us having high average satisfaction. And you can see here, it is effectively giving us, relative to having low satisfaction, at 0 satisfaction, you have minus 10% control. This is a relatively large amount. We're super satisfied as a result of the estates. But I think this is the last map mode. Hello. And then we're back to the hello again. So this has been our kind of deep dive on this subject. We already said like, comment, subscribe, or we didn't, but past generalist did, who's not as handsome as this one. So I guess we won't say that again. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have questions, put them in the comments. We're still going to do a Q&A. Try and highlight as many questions as possible and do a Q&A and this type of thing. If you had any requests, we did mention we have access to... I have screenshots of every single building and every single tech, and these are very much subject to change, so do not consider anything I talk about them locked in or anything like this. But if you guys had specific questions or you wanted to see specific things featured, I also have the unique advances of almost every country, these types of things. Let me know, and maybe can make a video about it if a lot of people want that, so upvote in particular things that you are interested in on that front. Probably going to, as long as people are interested on the EU5 content, I'm probably going to push it a little bit, and then other than that, probably switch back to Vic 3 stuff. Although a lot of the really interesting things that are happening in Victoria 3 are also happening in EU5, as we kind of, I think, showed with a little bit more of the explanations around the prices for those of you who are the Victoria 3 audience. Anyways, hope you enjoyed. Feel free to, we already said that stuff, algorithm stuff. Anyways, bye-bye now. Have a good one.